Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, grannies and gators. Welcome back to What's Up Canada for a kind of impromptu surprise throw together event of what could be epic proportions. So we're doing something a little bit different here tonight, guys, a little bit unique, and we are challenging the boundaries of what our establishment believes we should be allowed to do. So, what we're doing tonight is we are actually importing a live Zoom town hall with an all-star studded panel of people, yours truly included. I'm not sure why I'm there, but hey, the opportunity to bring this to all of you is perhaps reason enough. But some of the big people personalities that you guys are going to recognize or organizations, Western Standard is going to be there. Rebel Media's got a representative there. Shane Getson is an MLA from Alberta who's been very vocal. And so there's a link in the description. So this is where it's going to be unique, guys. There's a link in the description wherever you're tuning in from, that if you want to go and actually take part in the Zoom call and engage with the panelists, you can go and do that too. If you want to just watch this town hall taking place, great. You can do that from any of the 9 different platforms that we're streaming out across to tonight. So I'm just kind of getting where the other panel pulled up here. So this is where it's going to be kind of unique. Once I start importing the Zoom meeting, the actual town hall, I won't be here with you guys on the StreamYard dashboard. I'll still be watching all of your chats and comments on Rumble and Wimkin and Facebook. We are streaming on YouTube again. Surprise, surprise. Odyssey. And Rumble and our own platforms as well. So all of that's going to be going on in the background as well too. So this is where we're at. So hang on and hold on to. I have no idea what's going to come next, but it's going to be very interesting. So it looks like they're getting ready to launch here. So bear with me a little bit as I'm juggling an awful lot trying to do this. But once we get rolling, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely amazing.
For it to start showing up, it's wild the pot of hot water you can be in sitting as a frog, and until you get out of it and realize, oh wow, yeah, it's actually worse than I remember now.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, when you think of it, if we post one good story, one of our subscribers likes it, they throw it on their meta page, it's got a good cover to it, and then 2 of their friends share it. Like, that's how things would go viral for us now and then. And that's, again, most importantly, getting to new people. But once we lost that, it really hurt us. I mean, we've kind of recovered now since, but that original hit really hurt. If Google had done so, then we really would have been up shit creek.
Mm-hmm. So Google or Alphabet Company, they're not doing it?
Okay, let me know if you guys can hear the audio in this Zoom here now, guys, as I'm testing this out. There's about a 30-second delay from what I'm seeing to what you guys are. So if somebody can give me a thumbs up in the Facebook chat or in the Rumble chat. Awesome. Okay. So this is going to be kind of a awesome. So I'll be dropping out of here, chatting with you guys independently. I'll still be able to see your stream and your stuff, but yeah, have fun. Let's see what we can do with it.
So I think that might have been part of the handshake that kind of went along with that.
Bear with me, guys. I'm just sorting this out. This is brand new again to me.
Recording in progress.
Right, so I think we've got things started here. So I wanted to take a moment and thank everybody for showing up and let you all know that we got some really important guests here this evening, and they're on the other side of your computer. So it's really good to have you guys out. Hey, Gina, nice to see you. Yeah, so we've got not only some great guests in for speaking, but we've got some great guests in from the community here to join in as part of the conversation. So I'm going to start off with introducing the reason for the call here is Mr. Shane Getson, MLA from Lac St. Anne. He's been with the Yakk community on the Zoom calls for, I think this is his third recruiting trip. Drew Weatherhead, he's been on with us for a couple of times here. Cory Morgan has spent an afternoon with us, or a couple hours having a conversation. New to the group is Shane Wenzel. He's from Shane Homes here in Calgary. And then we also have Wayne Peters from What's Up Canada. And Wayne has been so gracious as he's going to be sharing the feed with a more large global community so that we can have some of these conversations extended a lot further. So yeah, it's really good to see you all, and I want to thank you all for taking some time and just coming out for the conversation. We don't have enough of these town hall type things. I kind of cool off in the summer with them for the simple reason being is that when it's warm outside and beer drinking weather, I don't want to bring my computer outside. So now that the thermometer is starting to get a little cooler, or the mercury's starting to drop, yeah, hopefully we'll have a few more of these things going on and some more great conversations. So I'm going to open up the evening and with some of the topics that I talked about in the Substack here. And one of the big things is we talked a lot about, and it's been kind of a big concern inside of my community with my family, friends. Right now our family is looking at sponsoring a couple of other families just through Christmas. So some landed immigrants inside of the Edmonton area from the Ukraine, because we're Ukrainians, and it's something that we decided to do instead of Christmas presents, which is kind of a cool idea. It was my father's idea. My sister's kind of onboarded with it. Veterans Food Bank. So, I appreciate your guys' support. There is an e-copy coming out. There's going to be a Canadian version and the US version, but it is going to be going global. And I wanted to thank, in particular, Gina Watteel. So you'll see her in the blue sweater. She's the one that put out Fisman's fraud. So she's here with us tonight. And she's the one that's probably given me the most amount of guidance, in addition with Cory Morgan, on how to do things properly with self-publishing. So yeah, inside of the topics that we're going over here this evening, just because everybody's kind of got different time frames of availability, is I'm going to have the two Shanes open up the conversation about what's going on with affordable housing inside of Canada. And Shane Wenzel, if I could be so bold as to just ask you to start off the conversation and what you're hearing about the federal grants for what we're seeing coming inside of the province. And I know you have an extensive history of working on affordable housing here in the city.
I appreciate that, Sheldon. I hope I can add some insight into that. But, as I was chatting with Shane Getson earlier on, there's a lack of detail on a lot of what the federal programs are, other than the fact that, they appear to want to fast track a lot of the programs out there, and I can't quite figure out how they're doing that, and I can't get answers on it. But the intent is to add billions of dollars into in subsidized housing to the Canadian housing stock, which from the best I can understand doesn't necessarily include single family homes, but more row homes, townhomes, and apartments. So, you know, all I can say on that part really is stay tuned. As the details come down, you know, I'd love to talk more about them.
Well, and inside of the community right now, and I know you kind of have your thumb on the pulse, it's been a couple of banner years for builders, and I know things are going kind of crazy. And I've seen some of your comments, and of course, I've talked to some people inside of the building circles. And I know right now on builders, I mean, they're building as fast as they can, and projections for what they've anticipated for 2023 were basically blown out of the waters.
We had this given to us, and it was James had it. So
Right.
We're getting there. Yeah, it's honestly, it's been flat out for the last 3 years. No one knew what to expect when we came out of lockdowns. To be honest, I even told our staff 30 days after that you know, I would guarantee everybody's job if we could just break even that year. And who knew, you know, things would explode the way they had. And it's been honestly, you know, flat out for the last 3 years in building. And, you know, to be honest, we would love to build more. We would love to sell more, because Calgary and Alberta especially seem to be the most attractive province in all of Canada to move to. We just don't have the trade base to do it. And usually you can accommodate that. You will get you will get trade base, transient trade base moving from one end of the country to the other. They're not doing that because it's the same story all across Canada. There's just no availability. And, you know, you have an aging workforce there. So what I try and tell a lot of the younger generation coming up is that you have the greatest opportunity before you. You just have to take hold of the brass ring here.
And there's a lot of good programs that are coming out through SAIT for trading. I mean, there was some industry changes last year on what they considered as, you know, journeymen. So there was a lot of just general workforce that are now in individual trades. And I know the government of Alberta has started to throw a lot of money through that. So I mean, I'm involved in one of the programs through the Roofers Association, in that, you know, not only were we promoting a small, individual school for the community to support people of the Roofers Association of Alberta, but also to promote the program through SAIT. So, I mean, that's just one facet, but there's a number of other ones. And I know the government is sponsoring heavily on those programs, which is great. So on housing, you know, what do you see out there for availabilities right now? And Shane Getson, if you wouldn't mind commenting, Alberta North and Alberta South are two very, very different beasts right now. I know building up north is considerably slower than what we're seeing in the south side of things, isn't it?
Well, it's regionally based, and again, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's just somebody talking here. I'm just going to throw some people on mute as they come up here, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so there was a number of really great items that, and you know, two wrongs might not make a right, but two Shanes on a call, that's a hell of a good start, I'd say. So I think we're getting things going the right direction here, by the way. So yeah, there's a number of things when it comes to the affordability and the housing crisis. So we're kind of we're kind of the victims of our own success in that regard. So we put out a big campaign saying Alberta's calling, because we are everywhere across the board. It's not just in the housing trades. We're down about 20 to 30 points on resources. On the side of the skilled trades, you know, we did the skilled trades task force. I was part of that. Did a study for Minister LaGrange, careers in education, and that's on the K-12 file, predominantly focused on 7 to 12. I literally just ran back from the other building back over here after session, and it was with all the university presidents. So I was meeting with Northwest College, U of A, SAIT, and NAIT. They're all in the same room, and we're all talking about a lot of different items that they're working on and getting that realigned. So people are really realizing that kids aren't understanding how quick they can get into their careers, because quite frankly, they don't know what they can be when they grow up because no one's told them. And also there was a parity of esteem issue that if you didn't do a certain thing out in mainstream media or otherwise, then, you know, you were lesser than. So that whole parity of esteem was a big deal as well. And then you look at the affordability crunch. So we've been hit with a number of things that are out of our control. The things that we are controlling, we're doing what we can. And we just posted some really good numbers on the budget today. So mid checkpoint on the budget, we're going to post another surplus. We're paying down debt. So all of this stuff may sound really political, and how the hell does it translate into affordable homes? Well, firstly, you got to have the people that can build the homes. You have to have homes to build. You have to have the money to do it. You have to have an economy that supports that risk that everyone takes to get it to that point to lock up and then have a good paying job afterwards. So we've really been working behind the scenes for the last number of years to set it up for success for Alberta. And now here we are. We've got the largest net migration since the 50s, and people are paying attention to what we're doing, inclusive of an announcement we just had today with Dow, which was going to throw a couple $1 billion around 8.8 or something like that. So we've got some really good numbers to post up on the scoreboard. That's going to help out a ton with the background, and then literally boots on the ground is going to be, how do we disperse those economies? And where I keep working on is in those corridors, tying the big cities, the $1 million+ cities. How does that translate back into where in the patch or otherwise? How do we get those products to market? How do we start looking at connecting that together? So you've got to have an affordability in mind with what we can control. And there's going to be some things that we step out for the folks that honestly have been harder hit in our economy. And Minister Nix. So anything that's coming back from there, we're always really taking a sober second look at it, making sure it's right. There's no other things in the way that'll cause undue harm later on down the road, and to make sure that we're in a decent position for Albertans going forward.
Shane, do you mind if I jump in and ask a question here real quick? Because when they hear the idea that we don't have enough affordable housing, or we just don't have enough housing in general. I know Sheldon was on the Sean Newman podcast recently talking about a family issue of one of your children, I believe Sheldon, that had a really hard time finding a home when he needed one. Now, my question would be kind of from a broader stance looking back, is this a problem with we don't have enough homes for the people that are here? Or is this an affect of us bringing in so many people that the Liberals are saying that what do they need, like another 500,000 to 1 million people a year they're trying to bring in the future? Is this sort of the tip of the spear of that problem projecting into the housing market, or is this some sort of intersection between those?
It's a yes for both. So it depends on the folks you're talking about coming in. There's a difference between migration and immigration. So when I'm talking migration, I guess I should have predicated that or made it more clear. Migration is folks that are already Canadian citizens that are moving here. And I think you can talk to a number of folks that have moved in from Ontario, British Columbia, or further out, and freedom sells. Like they literally like that, the Alberta calling thing, they having the freedom, mobility, the freedoms that come with being out here. So that sells. The immigration policy is something different from the feds. So it's jointly managed, but we don't really get a fair shake on it. Here's something that we would be in violent agreement with, in my personal opinion, with Quebec. We would like to have more control when we're talking about immigration of who we're bringing in and where. On the Ukrainian file, it's actually given us a really good opportunity to bring in good folks that have skills and training, that have education. We got a little bit of a language barrier to start off with, but these folks literally want to work. We haven't seen this since Alberta was built back in the 20s and 30s of this, same folks from that area community. And, I married a Ukrainian girl too. So you've got the history there that goes with that. Where if somebody doesn't know a Ukrainian, you haven't been in Alberta more than 5 minutes. So, it's a deep tapestry with our culture. Yeah. So there's that side of it where we can fall and make sure that we've got folks in place. The affordability thing, Drew, to your point, what was once a reasonable 900 square foot home for $86,000 isn't out there anymore. When you look at the costs of both the insurance, heating it, all those other items, that's what's driving it up a lot as well. And then you compound that with everyone kind of taking that pause during that COVID period and then trying to get a fresh start, getting everything ramped up all in a hurry. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now. And Shane, I'm not sure what you're seeing from your side, but that's kind of the 30,000 foot view. There's more I'm looking.
Shane, I would echo those comments, and I'll try and put a few figures to it. I would say prior to lockdown, the province of Alberta would have been short probably about 20 to 25,000 home starts, which, is manageable. It's reasonable. And with what's taken place over the last 3 years, we could quite possibly be behind about 80,000 at this point. And again, starting from zero after a lockdown, there were orders already in the system. And when you have a supply chain that's taken roughly 3 years to somewhat catch up, it's just compounded everything. And honestly, every year it's been a different challenge. This year, the challenge is, and I think this answers the one question from Drew. Most of our sales are coming from immigration, not even migration. It's immigration this time. It would be about 70% of our sales. So less people moving from Canada, more people moving in to Canada, and that's who we're servicing the bulk of.
Now, Shane, I remember, I think it was about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago that you'd mentioned that there was people that had, bought into properties. And I think it was about 10 families that had built their dream homes. By the time it came time for possession, is they could no longer afford to take over those homes. Are you still seeing more of that? Are we expecting more of that as the, I can only speculate that interest rates are going up in January, if not February. I ran a poll on Twitter/X, and everybody's pretty sure, like the vast majority of us, we're pretty sure it's happening in January. But, nobody knows what's coming. But are you still seeing a lot of the same thing?
Well, we don't have 10 every month now, but we do have 2 or 3 that are challenged with trying to take occupancy of their home because they can no longer qualify for that mortgage rate. As I guess a product of a longer build time, they're losing that special rate that they may have locked in for 12 months, and it's taking us at least 2 or 3 months longer to get everything together for them. And trust me, it's not for lack of trying. And we're certainly not trying to be difficult with them. We're trying to accommodate them because we would prefer them to have their home more than anything. But you are seeing at least 2 or 3 a month out of the, say, 50 we would occupy that are challenged. They're having to put another name on the contract if they can, or they're having to come up with more cash to complete the deal. That's concerning.
And I'd seen some builders that were, up to 2 years for possession dates from the time you, went through your selection. Is that timeline kind of shortened down a little bit? Like you mentioned, a few months. So is that you're at what, about the 15-month mark?
Well, ourselves, no. We're, from the time it hits the field, the time we occupy would be about 7 months. But you're spending about 3 to 4 months from the time they sign the documents to before you get it out to the field. Now, to give you an idea, it's 50% longer to occupy a home now.
Yeah, that's pretty insane.
Mm-hmm.
And so if interest rates do continue to go up, and again, that's what I'm forecasting, at least another rate hike for early 2024. What sort of challenges do you think that's going to pose in the marketplace as well? Is it going to make things a little worse or considerably worse? Like, what are we looking at? I mean, I know nobody can forecast when it's coming or the size of the hike that we could be looking at, but cost of living's gone up considerably. We're looking at more taxes or more CPP going to be paid out. The CPP2. We got more booze tax coming. There's another 5% hike on that. And then, of course, in April, we're looking at another jack in the carbon taxes. So if we throw another little bit of a rate hike in there, are we looking at like catastrophe? And I mean, this is Alberta specific, really, because I can see what's happening inside of the housing market in Ontario. People that bought, height 2022 are now taking a $500,000 hit because they can't afford their mortgage and they can't afford their property, and nobody can afford the rents there. But like for Alberta specific, what are you saying, man?
I would be concerned myself. Again, when you have 2 or 3 people who can't afford to take their homes because of a rate, another quarter point would be devastating. A half a point would, I can't even imagine what that would do to some families. It's another expense on top of the heightened taxes. I hate to believe in devastation, but that's exactly what it would be if the rates went up again January 1.
Hey, Andy Lee, welcome aboard. Glad you made it out.
There's trouble.
Oh, yeah, literally, right? Hi, yeah, it's great to meet you finally in person, Shane. This is awesome. It's good. Good to see you again, and good to meet everybody here. Yeah, no, I was just curious about it, and actually, I'm in that situation where I'm probably going to lose my house. I got a little, I've got one of those little bungalows in Lake Buena Vista, right? The ones that they've renovated because they like to keep these communities. There's not a lot of infills in Lake Buena Vista, right? But because I was in an odd situation, I bought my house when I was getting separated and I had no assets technically, so I had to get into a high interest rate mortgage, right? So my mortgage rate peaked out at like 12%. It was madness. But yeah, I was just curious too about, and my mom is actually here from Ontario with my grandmother, and they're house hunting. So they're one of those people who are getting really, really squeezed in Ontario. So they're actually out here and they're going to be house hunting here to look for something to retire and for more affordability. I'm just curious because we have a rental problem too. And maybe somebody can help me answer this. Is the rental problem mostly like younger couples and students, or is it like single families who are now not able to afford affordable housing? Like what's their rental demographic look like, and why is it under so much strain? I mean, the whole system is under strain. But I'm just curious, is it mostly students or young people who are, so-called migrating here to start over? Or is it just generally like, are we renting out to single families and things like that who can simply not afford homes anymore? I'm just curious if anybody can answer that.
I wish I had an answer for you. I don't, unfortunately. All I can say is from our perspective, there's a tremendous amount more purpose-built rentals being applied for at the city and the Calgary market area. Yeah, and I would say that that's probably increased. Best guess would be about 20 to 25%, especially if they're able to save the GST on those. But I couldn't tell you what the demographic is for people needing rental accommodations.
Yeah, from what I'd seen on the file before, like it was on the Minister's Advisory Council for Seniors and Housing and Affordability last go around. The pressures are from all over the place. So you've got seniors that can't afford their homes, unfortunately, and a lot of times they're trying to shed those, they're trying to find another place. And then you've got, hopefully if the model works, typically you'd have somebody else moving into their spots. But we've got a bit of a blind spot right now coming into COVID and some of those other pressures we spoke about. It's a bit of an anomaly in what we would typically see in that market. So right now the pressures are everybody who doesn't and didn't have a bunch of savings and that are being pressured, and when the interest rates go up and the other items, it's literally no one's free and clear of this one right now. And that's the most disconcerting part. And if folks took on a ton of debt on speculation or otherwise, or a few different properties potentially, then that also is going to be a compounding effect. So it's long-winded answer of saying it's not just one person, Andy. It's kind of all of the above from what we've seen here so far.
A lot of insanity. Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, I just wanted to chirp in a little bit from my observations from what I'm seeing out in Winnipeg, having been studying the consumer end of their rental prospects. And what I'm seeing is it kind of ties into what both the Shanes were saying is I'm seeing a lot of migrant families, first-time homeowners that are renting out their basements, their rooms, room by room by room. And anything to rent for yourself for a small family is almost double what it was a couple of years ago. So there's this widening gap between these people that are subletting their spaces and being, I mean, that's a whole other subject. But yeah, between the availability It's and the cost of is there's a really quickly widening gap that I'm seeing with my own eyes here in Winnipeg, and I've been noticing that all in the region, southern Manitoba, and pretty much hearing the same thing from elsewhere. Is this kind of the direction that people are facing looking forward? Is this a product of what you guys exactly were speaking to?
Well, I think it's a couple parts, Wayne, and if I'm understanding it correctly, we're all feeling it, the pinch right across Canada, but the markets are different in each area depending on the region and what the economy is, honestly. I think Alberta's in a better position between Saskatchewan and Alberta to weather the storm, quite honestly, because we can still have, we've got a younger demographic that's able to backfill these things that move out. We've still got a really pretty decent skilled workforce that's coming out of universities, post-secondary, and then in the high schools as well. And we've got a younger population. So with that, and with some of the economics, we're seeing big projects being announced, those type of things, because we've lowered the tax rates both corporately and personally. You've got a lot of people that are also investing here. So it's going to be a bump. As long as Sparkle, Socks, and Crowd doesn't keep yanking on levers they shouldn't have had their hands on in the first place, we can kind of weather the storm and get ahead of it. But honestly, that's the biggest question mark, is what is Crazy going to do next to try to upset the apple cart? And I think Saskatchewan and Alberta in a decent position to get through this bump and get people back moving again.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So I just wanted to comment a little bit just on what's going on with Calgary and this HGO new zoning thing, and maybe Shane Wenzel can comment a little bit, but I'm in Bowness, and so a lot of older homes are being bought up by corporations, and now with this HGO zoning, they can basically build unlimited amounts on a property. So we have just across the corner from us 2 duplex and a single family lot. They want to put 43 families on that. And then just another block away, a single family lot, they want to put 14 families on. And anything near a bus route is this new HGO zoning. And there's talk, I guess it's supposed to come to council earlier next year to make this the default zoning, and those are all going to be rentals, and there's just a small proportion that they have to offer below market at the rate, some small rate, like 10% below market, and they get federal funding. But they're not building housing for people to own. They're building tiny little boxes for people to rent, and they're squishing them in amongst established neighborhoods. It goes right against our bonus redevelopment plan. But anybody who's going to be near a bus route is probably going to see the same thing. And Shane, I don't know, like, you guys predominantly build in new developed areas, or do people also hire you to rebuild the house that they knocked down?
You know, at an average times, we would probably pick up the odd infill project. Right now, being so busy, we couldn't even consider it. Yeah. With regards to the upzoning and housing, honestly, I was concerned that was coming even 15 years ago, because the ideology of the city of Calgary really pushed that agenda back on suburbia here about 15 years ago. So it was kind of a fait accompli. It was going to come to establish neighborhoods, and yes, that is the attempt. It's to densify current neighborhoods that don't meet, say, today's standards.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an issue with some density, but we're talking 7 or 8 times here, and it's not in this similar contextual nature to the neighborhood. So, yeah.
I feel for you. I wouldn't want it myself.
Yeah. No.
There's a time and a place, and certainly I would agree myself personally with transit oriented development where you upzone everything around transit. And largely because that's the purpose behind transit, is to be used and move the masses around quite easily. It's a challenge when you get into older neighborhoods, and I don't like the approach that the city took with it, simply because they're railroading it through. I believe there's more public consultation required, and not every neighborhood is created equally.
No, it occurs to us as governance by crisis, and that, I don't know.
That's the best term for it, Sharon. Governance by crisis.
Yeah, and I've had folks reach out to me in Edmonton. Again, I'm not a city MLA, but my constituency is on the border of Edmonton, and they're seeing some of the same challenges with zoning as well. When we did talk to mayor and council, a couple items, they were putting it under the umbrella of modernization. So again, a lot of this does matter. Your municipal elections matter. These zones and hearing committees, they do matter.
Mm-hmm.
You have to show up and express your concerns if it's not to your liking, so to speak. I don't have to say it any other way.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for us provincially to reach into that because of the MGA. It would have to be something extremely untoward that didn't respect those processes. If they did something like that, we might have a reason or a sober second thought. But everything that we've seen so far, it's following the rules. So folks have to show up and participate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're sending lots of letters, but I mean, every development sign that's posted, somebody needs to look at it and see how it's going to affect their neighborhood, because this stuff is just getting railroaded through. They sold a park for development on Bonus Road. Like, it's just nuts.
Annie, you got a question? You're on mute.
Because I love Bonus. I love that area for my kids. We used to live in Springbank area. So I noticed that the other day when I was down there. I was like, oh my gosh, look at them banging in all these units into Bonus, right? And I was really, really shocked to see it. So just an observation, but also a question, because I'm dating somebody and they're doing tiny homes and things like that in Camrose outside Edmonton. So I don't know, like, Shane, is this something that you guys have looked at, or like really quick, more affordable modular housing? I'm not talking about, we all saw that shipping container housing that came out recently, right? I'm not talking about that. I don't know who drew that up, but like, I think that there maybe, there could be a case for, some really quick modular type housing. But I don't know if we've got specific challenges with weather and things like that. But I looked at it myself, actually, just in better days when interest rates were good, we had a property and I was like, maybe I'll just, instead of building, maybe I'll buy one of these modular homes and set it up, right? Because they can be done really, really nicely. They're attractive, right? They're not the shipping containers. You don't feel like you're living out at sea, or I don't know who designed that. But yeah, I was just curious if that was something that we're looking at in earnest as a solution. And maybe those properties could end up becoming stepping stones for renters towards getting them into more, permanent brick and mortar housing down the road.
RTMs are an entire industry of their own, Andy. RTMs are ready to move. So they're like what we know as traditional modular type homes. And there are a number of different companies inside of the province and, either headquartered here or just building here that are working on those same things. So, we were looking at a contract with one of our suppliers today, and, they've got, 5 different sites that are building these houses. And I've even done, a visit out to the Blood Tribe just south of Lethbridge and see what they're doing there too. Because for them, it's the easiest thing to do. And especially given the colder nature of the province, the wind zone that they're in, the challenges that they face there. So, they have an impressive facility and they're building, not as fast as they can, but they're on a steady track. But the other RTMs, I know they're building at a clip that I think is unprecedented right now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the same thing, Shane, on the RTM side.
Vaguely. vaguely. I guess as a background, my father used to be in mobile homes, so I've heard all the stories for about the past 50 years from him. As far as approving any tiny home projects or other projects like that inside the city of Calgary, Andy, I wouldn't hold my breath, especially if it's city-owned property like a park, like Sharon mentioned, that they're releasing for sale. They're going to be looking for density. They're going to be looking for the largest amount they can possibly get, and unfortunately, tiny homes just don't provide enough of that. You know, and just to gauge it, especially on a conventional city lot, your services are run based on a per front foot basis. And right now, I would say the average cost, just bare bones hard cost on a per front foot price is going to be about $4,500 a front foot. So if you just do the quick math on that, even every 10 feet is $45,000.
Yeah, and I think the advantage is in rural on this one. So the municipalities out there, they do it a lot quicker. I've had, the honor of having 5 different municipalities out their counties, right? So they've changed their zoning to allow for a bunch of these. I also have 17 summer villages in my constituency. It's the largest proportionate in the province. So there's tons of different things or ways of doing it. And you're right, everyone's talking about the RTMs. There's some decent packages out there. But yeah, it's more predominantly for those areas, the smaller communities within the zone from what I've seen. And that's really where you start getting your bang for the buck on those.
All right, so we've kind of dipped on housing. I don't want the entire conversation to be about housing. I mean, I know we could go on to affordability and housing for a good 6-8 hours.
It's making it easy for me because Shane's taken all the questions. It was awesome. It's a nice relief. I'm learning a lot. This is great.
Well, I have some things to go back with. There were a couple of other conversations that we wanted to get going in. Shane, one of the biggest things that's been a concern of mine since it was actually for 10 months prior to the last provincial election is the amount of NDP ads that, and we all know where the money's coming from. It's union funds that are promoting these ads. And they were on every radio station. They were on every local TV channel, every local app. They were on YouTube. They were every place. And I know Premier Smith has commented on this, but I mean, and part of the reason that I have Andy Lee in the house here is to look at the kind of the corruption that we're seeing from China on the bigger federal level. So hopefully we'll have some time for her to comment on her expertise on that. But what are we looking at by ways of balancing this out provincially? I mean, I think it was Pathfinder. I like the guy, Jeremy Farkas. He commented that I think it was $3 million that basically bought the 2 mayoral elections for Edmonton and Calgary, union funds. And then when we look at 11 seats that were turned from UCP into NDP. What sort of investigation or what sort of things can we do to I'm not going to say combat it. I'm just going to say level the playing field or eliminate that as part of the playing field when it comes to elections. There's just so much bullshit that's being spewed out by these people. It's so disgusting. You'd think after 3 years of fear porn, these guys would have tuckered out on the rhetoric. But every day you see it, it's coming in more full blast. And of course, then it's supported by the unions. And even when we looked at the million-person march, for parents, we've seen how quickly the unions were able to come out against that. And of course, Jagmeet Singh was in the thick of things. And, wherever you sit on the political scale, to see that kind of that big of a thumb on the scale is disheartening at best for democracy. So, what is the UCP looking at? What are you guys looking at, and how are we going to address this provincially to see that our elections are actually fair elections based on actual concerns of Albertans instead of bullshit? For lack of better words, it's all bullshit. I mean, like I said, it's just beer and smear from the whole whiny pack of them. I'll leave it at there.
Well, I thank you for the question. It was well placed. There's a few landmines in there. But so one of the things I think the essence of your question, Sheldon, is pouring out a bunch of frustration. I mean, the first part that you're concerned about is why was in the election, and I think it was blatantly obvious this go around that you could see how much rhetoric or propaganda or whatever you want to call it, one-sided advertising is out there. And you know, if anyone was on the bench before that, you think it's easy to get a good report for someone who's wearing a blue color on his lapel running an election in the CBC. Good luck. I mean, you get a pass. Most folks don't understand that on the NDP board, so we're talking their provincial board itself, that they have 3 designate union seats that sit on there. This is just how they're set up. And not all unions are created equal. So I kind of took a run at Big Daddy Gil McGowan there today and made a press release on it as well, was that the AFL comes out and starts talking down of how we're not following climate change and we don't care about the environment and everything else. Meanwhile, we're decarbonizing the entire petrochemical industry. Dow's, putting this huge investment out there. And quite frankly, from his standpoint, he doesn't speak for the building trades, and he sure as the heck doesn't speak for the Boilermakers or everybody else out there, or the Teamsters, whoever else is working on that union side of the equation. So that type of mentality doesn't work. Earlier on, I was challenged by members of the opposition to go out and talk to the coal miners out in my area in Keep Hills, that they want to have this idea that because we're conservative, that we don't support building trades, that we don't stand up for the working person or anything else. So I took that mantle. I went out there, and it was a very tough conversation because the last administration had prematurely shut down our coal mine, our nice base load generation that we're all feeling the pinch now every month we pay for the electric bill. And there was 12 union reps out on that site. We talked about the energy transition. We talked about the issues of packaging them out, how we couldn't turn the boat around. We talked about a number of tough things that I couldn't give them any guarantees on. So they're literally looking down a loaded gun as they're shutting down the coal mining side of it. And at the end of it, I said, well, how many of you guys voted for me? There was only 3 people in that room that didn't raise their hand. 2 of them weren't from my constituency. They did vote Conservative. The one from Edmonton voted NDP. I took that same message back to the House and kind of dropped a bit of a bombshell and dropped the gloves. That was when I was just newly elected. And that still resonates. I've been out to the union halls and Boilermakers. Those guys are phenomenal. But these unions do not speak for those hands. Most of the folks don't understand that a lot of their contributions on their daily or checks that go in are going towards a political party that is not of their choosing. The ability
you spoke to that on one of the last calls, and that they can make sure that it's not allocated towards supporting a political party.
Correct. So, we've changed that. So now folks have the choice, and also they have secret ballots if they're voting. Like the NDP had actually changed a bunch of the legislation, so we undid a bunch of that last time. As far as the other groups, I mean, if you look at the unions acting as a political action committee, then they have to fall underneath those rules and regulations. And it's up to Elections Alberta to make sure that everyone's following the law. Let's put it that way. Cory's got his hand up there. He probably weighs in on the media side a bit better than I could. So maybe I'll just stop there and open that up for comments too.
Go ahead, Cory.
Sure. I'm not even coming in so much from the media side, but in 2019, if some people watched the election really closely back then, I actually put in a formal complaint to Elections Alberta because there were the exact same names on a number of PACs who were the same names sitting on the board with the NDP. Like this was, and I still to this day feel a flagrant violation of at least the spirit of the law that's saying these should be separate organizations from the party rather than being fundraising wings and advertising arms of the party. How can you claim that these are independent units when you have the same people directing each organization, both the NDP and the AFL and other registered third-party advertisers? But the problem is too, Elections Alberta didn't get back to me until 3 months after the election, and they said they found nothing wrong with it. So, which I find difficult to believe. If that's the case, then just get rid of the regulation, because obviously you could. I guess we could get a bunch of UCP directors to form PACs on the side as well and raise funds and advertise supporting, their political agenda, and it wouldn't be considered a conflict, which is I got a feeling that you'd see a much different outcome in that case. The unions get quite a pass in filtering their money towards third-party advertising when it's so directly partisan towards the NDP. And it's one thing if a nurses union is lobbying for healthcare issues or related rights during an election. Okay, that's fine. But these were clearly pro-NDP. I mean, it was just more campaigning on their part, and it was the same people. I'm just saying we need to either change the legislation. I mean, I don't want to see more regulation. I'd rather just see it opened up more and have more transparency so we know exactly where all these dollars are coming from, who's behind it, and where they're being spent. But as it is right now, they to be blunt, sort of launder it through those union circles and through there, and there's a whole separate campaign going on the side, and they seem to get away with impunity right now.
Yeah, so part of any legislation too, you know, folks, we got to put it in context. This has been built up over years, and somebody nudges it or tweaks it, and someone else will find an advantage of it. And that's part of righting the ship, so to speak. Once you see some of these items that get a little leaning one way or the other, and you have to try to make that. The other thing is that until you have that out in place and you see these flagrant things, you know, to Cory's point, was that the intent of the original legislation? Well, depending where you're sitting on the side of the aisle at the time, maybe it was intended to be set that way. And hence why we saw some of the issues and tried to right it. So again, we've got another mandate ahead of us. You know, Albertans chose us to govern, thank goodness, from my perspective, my kids' perspectives, I think, that we want to try to correct this. Can't boil the ocean all at once, but there's a number of things that are taking place, and inclusive of some of the committees that are flashing up right now that look at some of these elements. So stay tuned. And then as far as the other thing I'll leave folks with is, if you look at this last election, and we talked a little bit about how much is filtered of what information you can get. So last year I was at a conference, and I'm not sure if we'd spoken about this before, Sheldon, and at a U.S. conference. It's the Conference of State Governments. And about 80 years ago in the US, the states thought that their federal government had way too much overreach. So they started this organization where all the states could get together and work on a number of items. One of the items they were talking about nationally, and there's a few Canadian provinces where we're partners of that, and I was representing Alberta. So I go in this room, about 80 people, and it's all about disinformation, and it's all talking about the media and what's taking place. We had 2 university profs sitting up at the front and a legislator, and they were contemplating some of the items that we're sitting out there, that how do you control the media? How do you make sure that folks get decent information? So I'm listening to this conversation going, and starting to make the hair in the back of my neck stand up, because holy crow, they're thinking what the land of the free and the home of the brave and free speech and everything else are starting to contemplate about combating what they're considering disinformation. So I jump up and grab the microphone about halfway through this thing, and didn't say that I was from Alberta or Canadian. And then I said, well, I got an idea. Maybe what we can do is get a federally owned broadcasting corporation. It can be on radio and it can be in television. And then that way we don't have to worry about advertising, and that wouldn't slant the message. So we could fund that federally. I said, once we get that established, you know, people know it's a trusted news source. Well, then you can start to pay some advertising time on some of the big, you know, media outlets, and then we can make sure our message is getting out there too. I said, once you get that established, we still got to deal with that pesky internet. So maybe what we can do is maybe on our cultural side of it or something like that. Well, then we could start to filter out the bad information and run some counter bots. And then we could, you know, and people are starting to look at me now. They're starting to pay attention. At that point, and we hadn't had that last act that went through, was literally before the Senate on the internet. And I held it up on my cell phone and I said, this is why we don't want you to do this, you guys. You're talking about countries as if they're far away that have done this. You're talking about socialist countries and communist countries. All you have to do is look north of your border. And I can tell you it works so well that you never heard that it was happening until a bunch of guys from my province threw Canadian flags in their trucks and drove to Ottawa. I said, for whatever you do, do not do this. Do not go down this path. So that kind of changed the entire tone. And you don't realize how much is being filtered and what's taking place until we're actually living that, or until you say that out loud to other people of the context and the ramifications. So the last campaign, we saw that full well. It was ran in the media. It was 100%. They weren't counting on us winning. So we've got to right a few of those things as best as we can for all fairness. And where we excel at, though, is the ground game. They might have the air war, but typically Conservatives have the ground game, and make sure let's keep outlets like this going. And I would even go further and make sure that you've got podcasts that aren't being shut out in the night next, because that's their next push.
Yeah, that's it. And, you know, again, just seeing, you know, the union impact, that comes from this. And, you know, the Liberals have really kind of hopped on the whole supporting the union wagon. So I don't know if they're trying to steal back votes from the NDP or lock them in from the NDP.
It's a bit different. I mean, you've got Thelma and Louise that have this little pack down there. They're propping each other up. And I don't know how long that is going to work before the T-bird goes flying off the cliff, but couldn't be soon enough, in my opinion. But when you talk to the working hands, you've got two different parts. You've got the folks that build things and put things together. And then you've got the other unions that are out there. So it's the public sector workers, the teachers, you know, the other side of it. They're not so different, but at the same time, it's like water and oil. Again, when I walk into a room and I'm talking about the folks that build things, again, I can get you 90% of them typically lean my way. Like, honestly, when we talk about things, it's regardless. When I go into some of those other crowds, it's about maybe 30% lean my way. And there's the biggest difference. So when you're talking politically, which groups are they talking to the most? And which ones are they trying to placate? And a lot of that, if you look at the messaging, it's always ramping up people's emotions. It's always the fear tactics. It's always doing that. And as an MLA, I get the Teachers Union magazine every month. It comes into my office, and it's pretty wild sitting in the place where we're actually debating these things and talking about law. And then I pick up that weekly magazine and see how different it is. And that's what the population is reading. They're not seeing what's happening here, even though we've got cameras on us nonstop. Each we've ever made, it's there for history. And then looking what's being published from those magazines. It is literally, that's the narrative, who's tied in with who, where, and who gets the best donations and who sits on whose board. It's pretty eye-opening for a new politician, that's for sure.
Well, and like my concern is that I'm not going to say we, I mean, well, we as taxpayers are paying for $50 billion after debt servicing for battery plants inside the province of Ontario that have already been dedicated as union shops, where we're hiring 16 to 1,800 temporary foreign workers. So I mean, there's going to be zero value for them to be inside of a union, except the dues are going to go towards the advertising campaigns that are going to support the Liberals or the NDPs. And that's where my concern comes in. I mean, I know that there's nothing that you per se can do on the federal level. It's more so, you know, when you see it happening on the, well, you know, inside the municipalities, you see it happening, you know, who's taken over our mayoral positions, how they've achieved those. And you see what happened inside the provincial. A lot of us are shit scared about what's going to happen in the next fucking election, man. It's crazy.
Well, I think we said it before too. We're kind of the meat in the sandwich, and what I've kind of said to folks in my area, because there's a lot of people are paying attention to politics now because of the last number of years. There's a lot of folks that are paying attention to this. Oh, I think Shane's signing out.
Yeah.
But
good seeing you, Shane. Take care, man.
But to your point, Sheldon, a lot of people are paying attention, including this call, and is why I really enjoy the avenue to talk to people like this. Is that it's not just one or the other, it's all of the above. And when you look at how the other side has been running and managing the system for years, they understand it better than we do as novices. But the good thing is I still believe we're in the majority, and you got a lot of folks when we start working together and you pay attention to both your school boards, your library boards, your local municipal election, your provincial election, your counselors, you know, that are going on those, your representatives. And if you don't see somebody that you think is decent, then honestly, do what I did, jump up off the bench and put your hand in, at least do a couple tours of duty, because that's all you can really do. And the system does work. I wasn't from a political background. I had no idea who Jason Kenney was if he showed up in my soup. So it wasn't because I was a political insider. I was literally somebody who just paratrooped in, took what I knew from my industry, applied it to this, and I've been trying to do something from the inside. And lo and behold, a lot of people felt the same way. And those are the colleagues, vast majority of them that are around me. That's what you got to do. And it's at all levels. And if you have somebody there that maybe they're not the perfect person, but they're good enough for 80% of what you believe in and do that, and you think you can trust them, then get behind them and make sure you can keep it going and hold them accountable too. Don't let somebody become part of the system because you don't have that connection. Make sure you stay engaged. That's all I can offer on that side.
No, and I believe that's absolutely it. You can agree with a politician. You can agree with you can be partisan. That doesn't mean that you support 100% of what everybody says. And it's important that people really kind of get behind that as an idea. that just because you support Shane Getson doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything Shane Getson says. And if you have a question for Shane Getson, then that's a conversation that you need to have with Shane Getson. And I encourage people to have that with all politicians. I mean, a lot of us, especially inside of my group, and I'm not going to say especially inside my group, but I know that I've gone through and published letters that people can copy and paste into their own email, send it off to their own, their MLA or their MP, put in their own information, make the modifications that they see. But if it's something that we're all concerned about, then these things have to go out. And the number of replies that we've actually gotten on these is as close to zero as you'd ever imagine. Not to hoard too much of the conversation, Andy Lee, I think, had another question here. Go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say too, yeah, I mean, this is all new to me, right? You guys have been in political I've been political for like 2-3 years now. But something I did notice too is, the union thing is fascinating provincially, but the other, third party election sort of systems are, these special interest groups, and a lot of them are diversity and inclusion groups. We've seen it, like we saw Gali, who gets massive federal funding, striking out against Danielle Smith, the UCP, Jordan Peterson, right? They tried to get his events canceled and things like that. And these groups get obscene amount of federal funding. So it's almost a form of it's not just provincially, unions are messing around. It's almost a form of the federal government funding special interest groups. And there's so many of them. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars going to these groups who then, typically will lash out at conservative politicians and act sort of as a third party election body for, the provincial, usually a Liberal or NDP, it would be NDP here. But it's fascinating because I've looked into so many of these groups and the funding and it's so vast. They'll appear with the candidates of their choice and things like that, right? Like they go to events together. You've seen them at the, the Palestinian rallies and things like that. It's a massive problem in our elections is how I see it. And they're just tossing more and more money at it because it's working. I don't think it's as bad in Alberta, but when you look at like the groups in Ontario and things like that, and the way that, a lot of these special interest groups get federal funding and then they'll go out and rally with politicians and things like that and policies. And a lot of them are official lobbyists, right? And they are getting government cash. So it's just madness. It's once I started to understand that whole machine more and how it worked, it's incredible that conservatives can ever win an election, right? The network is so vast and so wild. Unions are definitely a part of it. The Chinese interference if that's something, and I'm gonna have something fun on that tomorrow. I got some news that something's gonna drop tomorrow. That should be interesting. So, honestly, the Chinese interference, when you look at, it's more the special interests. That's where I'm seeing the bulk of the money. It's the unions, and then it's the special interest groups that are getting just chucked money at the federal government, which is completely inappropriate, in my opinion. If you're a lobbyist, then you register as a third party election group, right? And you're a lobbyist, right? You don't sort of secretly take, $10 million from the federal government and then use it to badmouth conservatives and Alberta and all these things. So the lobby industry is just, it's wild, right? Anyways.
Along the same lines, Andy, I looked at the city of Calgary and trying to take on advice from Shane. He said, just be more a part of it. If you don't want to see things inside of your library, then stand up and go onto your board of your library. So I seen when the city of Calgary was holding some positions for volunteers and being on certain boards and stuff. And I looked through these things, and as I read through them, the more I read through them, the more hostile I was actually getting. Like reading through some of this stuff was offensively fucking stupid. Like it was so terrible. I couldn't believe what I was reading and what they were actually. And I thought, if I throw my name in any of these places, I am not getting in. And if I get in, I'll be asked to leave inside of the first 12 minutes, I'm sure, inside of a conversation, because I just couldn't sit quiet through the lunacy that was going on here. And it's like, what are you people talking about? You know, there are serious problems for people in the city of Calgary right now, people in the province. And these are the conversations that you want to be having. And, you know, even when we look at the 7.8%, property tax hike that the city council just put through, and you look at it and you go, like, what are you guys doing? You're forecasting. You're adding money in because you believe things are going up, which is going to give you like carte blanche reign to just spend more money that you're charging people so that you can increase it again following. It's just absolute insanity. Go ahead, Wayne.
All right, this is kind of have maybe a landmine or two in it, but so I'll start off with Shane. Thank you for having the fortitude to at least do this. You were one of the exceptional few willing to do that. That's primarily why I'm here, because at this point, I personally mostly feel like a political orphan, and I really resonate due to what I deal with, swimming in the swamp all day, with the frustration being, on display Canada-wide. And I don't think that Alberta is unique to that. I do think, however, that people brave enough as yourself to step into the public forum like this tend to bear an unfair amount of that frustration, perhaps sometimes, because you are the only outlet. But I also want to address where you mentioned about elections, and maintaining conflicts there. I think that this is where a lot of the frustration in Alberta, because it's been so hugely on display with, the NDP premier and her husband's role and position with the unions. When you start to dig into the conflicts there, it's like an Etch-a-Sketch. It's far beyond anything comprehensible to John Q. Public. And yet we have elections officials that have some capacity apparently to look into this, but yet there seems to be nothing done, no voice. Is there a direction or somebody? How do the people put the pressure on to have some accountability and transparency? Where's the hot button for the elections? People monitoring these kinds of things, because when you have the writers union literally coming out declaring war on the Conservative Party of Canada, how can that stand to be that these people are still allowed to operate and mandate their mandates and there's no teeth? So kind of maybe awkward and some landmines in there, but trying to touch on a lot of the points I think that are coming to this, because I won't go after you about the collusion and the theories behind what's going on with the unions. That's being very, very buried, and I don't think that we can get to those until we go through some of the conflicts within the electoral process.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that, Wayne. And I've ran into you a couple of times at different events, and you've offered me a ton of insight too, by being in the crowd and listening to what you've had to say about your experience over the years too. So it goes both ways. And then one of those things is kind of eyes wide open. Once you've heard it, then you have to look at things differently and reassess. So when it comes down to the unions, again, I have nothing against them. Like, honestly, I don't. Prior life worked all across Canada, all across North America, and each different region operate in their own different way. But being elected, I fully realized that all unions are not created equal. I kind of said that. I believe the same thing with the political parties when they were originally established. If you look back in the day, the Liberals of today and the NDP today are not what they were founded on. They were not from what we remember as kids in the 80s or even the 70s. They've morphed into something else. So if you're looking at these parties as a vehicle, someone else has got in and grabbed the pickup and now they're driving it down the road. It might be the same pickup. They painted a different color and there's way different drivers. And who the hell says they're heading the same direction? And then Joe Public, that's been riding along in that pickup for years, just hops in the back and they're taking you for quite the ride. So it's gone from being a type of party that people could believe in or what their morals and ethics were, and it's changed into something else. And a lot of that narrative has been hijacked over the years. The frailty in our system is also one of its biggest strengths. And again, I'll take that as myself. I'm nobody that ran a different business, different industry, jumped up, became an MLA because folks in my area wanted someone to help them out. And I was compelled to actually do something because I care about my country and my province, and jumped in my area. So by that means the electoral process worked. No matter what they threw at me, I still managed to knock.
You're the one texting Maddie.
Their agriculture.
I texted in Cory.
So that worked. When it comes down to the even electoral zones and the ethics commissioner, and if you look at some of the other commissioners here, that including the electoral commissioner, a lot of those fall under the privy of the electorate that you put in place, and a lot of that falls under both party committees. So I happen to chair 3 of those committees right now. Some of the mandates that those committees have are to look in some of these items.
Oh, so I got the right guy today.
So there's things I can say that we do work that's public facing on those committees and timing and everything else. And some things that are honestly in camera because there's a lot of real sensitivities around that. Moreover, I'm sworn to caucus confidence, but I'm also on cabinet confidence as well. I'm the chief government whip, so I deal with that type of the equation. And I'm also a parliamentary secretary that reports directly to the premier on economic corridor development and intergovernmental affairs. So fancy way of saying that a first timer can actually work his backside off, prove what he's done, get in there and actually influence change. So the system works, but you have to get off the couch to make it work. Once you have enough like-minded folks that are there, and I think most of the folks in the call are kind of leaning a certain way or have certain morals and values and ethics, that belief system, you have to make sure that those folks can stay in long enough to make sure that they can make the changes. And I'll do that with a grain of salt. The folks that stay in there shouldn't stay in too long, or else they become part of the problem. So you have to have a turnover, I believe, in our system of newly elected, freshing out, maybe being there for a couple terms, and then moving on out and helping in a different capacity. And then you need to have a smattering of individuals that are those political gurus that go to U of A for whatever reason to take poli-sci and want to do that for a career, because you need a balance in between. And then once you're in power, you have to make sure if there's things within the bureaucracy or the machine and behind the system, you have to have the intestinal fortitude to change what needs to be changed, but to be wise enough not to go around and just start yanking and changing everything. If it's working steady state, you have to be a good manager in that regard. That takes some patience and timing. But when you do find those issues, then you need to make some real change. And that is not easy in a political stream nowadays. All the things I've laid out are not flipping easy. Look what we've gone through in the last 5 years. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did. You dodged the landmines very well. Thank you. Thank you for addressing most of that. That also kind of confirmed that there was meat to my question, and you're working on it. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it, and it's a real privilege to be able to be in a position to do this. I think there was one of my superintendents, he had told me, he says, Shane, once you get to your 40s, and I'm dating myself now, I turned 50 last year, but working on a project site in my early 30s, he goes, once you get in your 40s, he says, you're going to have something that's really profound. Things are going to become as they appear. And it's, once you get in behind the looking glass, you can only speculate. And once you're there, yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be changed. And there's a lot of really good things happening. I believe we're making the changes. The biggest problem we have is a lot of folks don't understand that you can't turn it around on a dime. Some of the stuff on the surface you're going to, but the big meaty things of substance, they've been around for a lot longer, and they're going to outsurvive and outlast us if we're not careful and we don't step in those damn landmines. I can handle blowing up in a landmine that somebody else puts from me from the other side. It kind of makes me sad when it's our own team that does it to you. That's the part we've got to pay attention to and make sure we do that. Hold each other accountable, and like every good family or every good hockey team, make sure your players are putting out and doing those things, but don't go shooting pucks in your own net at the other end to punish your own players.
Which is actually an interesting way to kind of lead into the next transition for Tom's conversation as to what the hell is going on with AHS right now. There has been some big changes, and I mean, if we're going to adjust their, kind of talk about public unions and, what the other parties had set out for you by way of landmines and stuff. It seemed to me like there was a lot of the AH staff, and I'll call myself very, very partisan, very biased on Alberta Health Services right now. I won't hold any punches on that. But I know the UCP has kind of come in and under Daniel Smith has started to make some pretty serious changes. So from the 3,000 mile view here, do you want to give us an idea of what that exactly looks like, Shane? Just so we can all kind of get our heads wrapped around it. I mean, there's so many conversations that are going on that it's really, really hard to keep up with. So just, what is the one thing that the public should be really having a look at when it comes to what your government is doing with Alberta Health Services right now?
Yeah, so it's a reorg in its simplest form. So prior life, I would work for corporations, go in and troubleshoot and, get projects back online, and you'd look at the processes, you'd look at how the organization works, and then make some recommendations for efficiencies. So a friend of mine, he who shall remain nameless, was an emergency room physician when I first ran. I kind of pointed out some of the issues that I was seeing and hearing. My wife is a dentist. My father-in-law, God rest his soul, ran a hospital for 30 years as chief of staff, and he was a military trained doctor, so he gave a different perspective. My mother-in-law is a retired nurse. In my wife's family, a lot of them are medical, so I had an unbiased, unvarnished opinion that I could pick up the phone and talk to folks, and they gave me some insight of how things changed over the years of someone who was practicing in the 60s and 70s to where it became now. And my friend, who's of my vintage, a couple of years younger than me, I talked about some of the efficiencies or changes I would make, and he says, "You haven't talked about cutting the budget at all yet." And I said, "No, it's efficiencies, improvement, and making organizational changes." And he says, "You're right." He says, quite honestly, he says, AHS has become a calcified, cash-hungry, unwieldy monster. So this is coming from an emergency room doc. It's not the frontline folks that are the biggest problem here. Quite frankly, it's the other way. It's this big, massive machine. When we compared what our system was delivering towards Germany as an example, and arguably Germany is way lefter leaning than we ever would contemplate out here, but they're running their healthcare system with 60% less overheads. But that, pretty easy for the dog to go after the lamest duck. You look at that's where the biggest problem was. So the thing that we said and I said this in a number of town halls, I'd ask folks, in the election and otherwise, if you think the system's working great, raise your hand. And not very many did. And then to the other ones that said, okay, those that you didn't raise your hand, put it up now. How many of you actually want me to change the system? Because if we're going to get into this, if it's not working, you gotta let me fix it. And that's where we're at. So the minister took the summer between the election, got some advisors, came back with some recommendations, and obviously we did some fundamental changes at that board level. And then, the likes of Watteel Oldberg being involved with us gives us tons of legacy, as well as, his background being from the medical side. He is a doc himself. And what we're doing is making some fundamental organizational changes, and stay tuned. It's going to help people. It's going to be there. Now, the thing I did caution a lot of folks, and even our minister, and I said, in a corporation, the amount of changes you're making would typically take place over a decade. Like, it's that big of a machine. We're going to try to button this thing up within a couple of years because Albertans deserve it. That's how messed up things have become. We need to really get in there and do this. So that's what's happening. Some fundamental changes, reorging this thing, and we're going to have measured improvements in short order because that's the expectations that Albertans have.
Hi, Andy.
Going to put the patient back at the center for the service model, not the system wrapped around the patient. It's the other way around. The patient actually has to be focused, has to be delivered, has to be good healthcare, and has to be timely.
Shane, could I ask you just a little bit more of a direct question? Because I hear a lot of good stuff in what you're saying, but I can't really nail down anything that is specific about that. Could you give me like one big ticket reorganizational change that you're very excited about that's going to make that efficiency difference you're talking about?
Yeah, so if you looked at AHS prior to the recommendations, because again, they still have to go through them, but if you look at AHS, it's one big box on the org chart. AHS now has been broken into one smaller box and 3 holes to report directly into ministries. So you've taken one big chunk organization, you've turned that on its side and carved it up. And now you've got more control from those ministries directly into those areas of delivery.
So it's a version of decentralization.
Yeah, for the most part, efficiencies in the org chart. So yeah, you've had one big major center that was the be all end all. And now you've carved off chunks of that and allowed the ministries themselves to have input. So it's a different reporting structure, and it also allows for rescoping. That's pretty exciting.
I want to jump in here with a question on this restructuring. Is this going to impact how the College of Physicians and Surgeons operates in Alberta? I think that's something that a lot of physicians that I've talked to over the last couple of years through my doctor talks would be very interested in knowing. Is there's a lot of allegations of overreach, and I don't want to get into any of that. Sheldon's a far greater expert on that than I ever could be, but I think that that's something that I don't know if that ties into what you guys are doing at all or not.
Not really, like not directly. So there's where the boogeyman thing starts to come out. On a 30,000-foot view with a bunch of the organizations that we had. When it comes down to credentialing, those type of things, if you've never looked at the engineers and I look at some of the other professional organizations, we passed legislation last sitting when we were in that basically allowed us to crack the top off on some of these credentialing items, to basically say if you're rejecting people or if you're doing those type of things, it better be for a good reason, and you have to get back to the people and tell them why. So it gave us the latitude to not just wholly pass it over to those colleges and those boards to be the be-all end-all, because quite frankly, they're extensions of the state. If you look at that, it was taking in the public trust, putting a ton of those technical items there. We don't have those backgrounds and training as lay people or as politicians, allowing these boards to be stood up on our behalf because they're professionals. Back in the day when professionals were professionals and still are, that was the intent. Over time, some of these things morphed potentially politically or otherwise, and these little fiefdoms and protectionism started to creep in. And then you start to see on a compounding effect for a ton of the professions out there, when we're not recognizing credentialing as an example as someone who's received their study in Germany as a thoracic surgeon, they come to Canada and all of a sudden their credentialing is not being recognized by our boards. And it's not like you have to, to shadow and you got to make sure you've got another doc overseeing and everything else. But a lot of these things were literally tied up in internal bureaucracies. So I think if folks have been working in that light for a number of years and are very protectionist in that regard, then they have to think about what the impacts really are here. Service delivery is going down. You need more people to do these jobs. We don't have them. So they have to look at what was the intent for the patient. What are you trying to protect for the actual public itself? Knowing those, and then honestly checking some of the politics that have been built up over the years. If everyone's kind of on the same page, I don't think anyone has any cause for concern. But if they are some of those folks that have been impediments and they know who they are, then maybe you want to give it a sober second pause and see that maybe you might want to retool things and re-equip and get with the program.
One of the things that I see, and again, we're very specific inside of our circles here, is that there has been an exorbitant amount of faith that's been lost in the medical establishment inside of not just the province of Alberta or the city of Calgary or Edmonton, but across the board towards Health Canada and towards any governing party. And it doesn't seem like there's any sort of attempt. It seems to be an assumption that's all going to come back. We've seen with the report that was published by Preston Manning that there were a lot of inefficiencies, maybe some things that could definitely be changed. I think it was a little on the weak side, but I understand the premise of what the report had to actually come up with.
Part of it too, and I'll just jump in on that. So part of that too is, we gave them latitude to do that, and you had to have a balanced board and everything else. What I was really happy with was that it stayed pretty much politically neutral, which is a good point where you want to start from. And again, knowing that this is a big system, that if you make some of these changes, they might seem minor or not as strong as you may have wanted. But if you look at the cumulative effect of making those changes, whether you get 50 or 60% of the way through it, you can have orders of magnitude of impact and change from those changes. One at a time, it might seem pretty milquetoast, but when you look at the cumulative effect, it can be pretty profound. The other thing too is that you're right; it's right across the country. for us to deny what took place in the last few years of turmoil, challenges, and everything else that went sideways. That would just be ostriches putting their head in the sand. But without diving back into that piranha tank and going through that again, how do we look at this as a lessons learned? I believe that a lot of the things we have to remember, don't ever forget it, but you have to look at this as a lessons learned of how do I fix the things that are in front of me, know what I can change, accept those that I can't, and maybe put those on the parking lot list of I'll get back to those, and if it's really bad, then maybe it'll pile to the top of the list. So if we start implementing some of the items that the recommendations from this report and several other ones, and if we can incorporate it while we're making these organizational changes over at AHS and how we deliver, I think Albertans will see those effects in the next couple of years, not 10 years down the road, like it was a typical organization. You'll actually see better service. You'll see changes in attitudes. You'll see a ton of other things that come out of it that'll benefit us for decades to come.
And it's like any other restructuring program, I would imagine. I mean, you go to a restaurant, you have a bad meal, new ownership takes over. They clean house, they restructure the restaurant, they put a new coat of paint on the walls, they change up the tablecloths and buy some new silverware. The menu's pretty much the same, but they have a new chef in the house. So it's going to take a while for people to kind of come back towards that general direction. And in a restaurant, it's kind of an entire different thing because, you'll give a restaurant a second shot. But when you've seen the abysmal failures inside of the provincial health services provider, and I'll even extend that out to the long-term care communities. Like you said, just to rebuild that faith. I mean, we're not talking something small. I mean, this is something dramatic and something very significant.
It's 42% of our budget, you guys. We spend more on and I kind of put this out and took some heat for it. First I was using some of the salaries that were published by CBC on Verna Yu, of what she was doing, and I was, using that tongue in cheek, saying, are we getting our bang for our buck? I was pretty frustrated about a bunch of things. And it was interesting, all the folks that jumped up and down and supported her, but, jump up and down the other way when you've got a working hand that shouldn't get overtime or something else. Like it was pretty wild, it was profound in that regard. But the other side of it was that service delivery model that for somehow or somewhere along the way, I'd comment, we'd lost our way on the service delivery is the patient. That when you've got folks that are leaving the country or bouncing back and forth or sitting on a waiting list for years, this is wrong and is not failing. Stop putting lipstick on a pig, fix the damn thing, and let's get after it. So you got to make those changes, and knowing full well you're going to go through a transition to make those changes. And again, Sheldon, honestly, if I was looking at Enbridge bought Spectra and Enbridge didn't just fully merge in a year or 2 years and up and running. Like it takes years once you start changing organizations, cultures, pulling that together. And that's the largest pipeline company in North America. It's still the same pipeline company, right? But all of a sudden you're fundamentally changing an organization and a culture and making sure that the frontline service has their support and a voice and everything else while you're carving out the back end that's been making up all the rules of the administration and the largest portion of that cash, that extra 60% overhead, when you compare them against other jurisdictions. Like this is like changing the transmission while you're driving the car down the highway. Like put it in context. This is something pretty crazy. And to your point, the only thing that people can measure is what they see in front of them. And the next time they go to a hospital, if they're not in and out of there in quick service, then that's where we're failing. But that is the thing that they have to measure against is what is their service? How quick can they get in? And do they have to look for alternate services? Because the big one that's cash hungry, we've been paying it for years, isn't getting her. So we have to have measurable things that people can see and that we hold people to account to perform in those KPIs that they deliver. That's where this is heading.
That's awesome. Regina, did you have a question? You're on no.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not sure if this is the time to jump in because just when you're talking, you mentioned the Manning report and a bunch of things in there. So I just wanted to talk about one specific thing. So one of the things that I'm really focused on right now, because of the last 3 years, is accountability for what went on, plus putting protections in place so that some of the major violations don't happen again. So those are the two things that I'm looking for. And right now I feel that the initiative is on our side in that most people recognize that a lot of the pandemic, like the vaccine mandates and a lot of the pandemic measures were a failure. And not only that, not only do we have data on our side, but we have clear indications of fraudulent activity. And also right now we have, Trudeau's taking in the polls. So I see this as a good opportunity for change. So just based on that, and I just wanted to get into what I covered a little bit in my book, and fraud played a really big role. And we have clear indications of fraudulent activity, not just by the researchers, but we have that the establishments are implicated in the fraud. So in terms of accountability, when I look at this, I look at the researchers and I think, well, scientific fraud is something that careers should die on. They should die on. So that's one way to get accountability, is to look at the players who actually did the fraudulent activity. So that's why I wrote the book. But not just that, I'm looking at different organizations were complicit in this fraud. They knowingly accepted it and went with it to get the narrative that they wanted. So these organizations include, major, the top academic school, University of Toronto. You're looking at the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and you're looking at the federal government through its CIHR funding and through what they introduced in Parliament. And my point here is that I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that they are all willing to resort to fraud to get what they wanted. And in this particular case, what they wanted was the vaccine mandates and people to pick up the vaccine, to take the vaccines. So then I'm looking at what Danielle Smith promised, and she promised, well, I'm not sure if it was an actual promise, but she did mention putting in protections for vaccine choice and changing the code in Alberta. Do you guys remember that? She had mentioned putting in protections.
Yeah, so I can walk through in generalities. So again, you have to understand, as Chief Government Whip, one of my items is to protect the Premier, the caucus, our party against threats both foreign and domestic. So take that with a grain of salt as you would as well. There's items that we're working on this file that I can talk about, such as court cases that have now come to pass, such as reports that have now come to pass. And there's a ton of things that I can't talk about because none of it is yet to come to pass.
Okay.
Sheldon, Cory.
Yeah. Okay, so is that still on the table? Are you allowed to say whether it's still on the table that they're trying to change the code? Or
yeah, so where I can go back with is on this is the more data that we have at our disposal, the more of these reports and the more of these court cases come to the forefront, gives us a better avenue as legislators to find out where there's issues with law and what we can bring forward through the House to either tweak regulations or to change law.
All right. So my thing, so the way I look at it,
I'm not trying to be evasive, Dean. There's just things I can't tell you.
I realize that, but from what I'm trying to put forward is, in terms of the argument for making a change, if we can show that the establishment was willing to resort to fraud in order to basically take away a person's right to choose, is that not a strong argument towards protections and putting protections in place?
I would say, yeah, you've got a very strong argument. Anytime that you can prove that there was either criminal negligence or intent, or that the folks have broken laws outright, and I think that'll come out, the proof is in the pudding, right? So the more of those type of things that come place, and the more that folks or institutions are named in those type of cases, suits, and files, it absolutely gives legislators a better chance to either look at the existing legislation that wasn't followed, or the laws, or to look at potentially, depending on whether it's federal or provincial, where our privy is, have also the cause and consequence for it. So the actual restitutions that could be paid, or the jail time that could be dealt out. So all of that stuff makes sense. The frustrating part with everybody, including me, is it always seems to take so damn long to do these things, and the harm is already done by the time the courts and everything else catches up. Unfortunately, that's our system. There's not a ton of things that we can do for that. But on different files, that's where, we're changing the way we deal with the feds on a number of items, of basically saying, sue us, not the other way around. so to what your point is, all of this is going to help to make better laws, better legislation. It's just the timeline thing that is always the question mark of how long it takes to physically do that. And then on my side, there's things I can talk about that we're working on and things I absolutely can't talk about that may or may not be worked on.
One of the things that, Gina, and I'm not trying to, shut you down because I think you have a lot of valid points and a lot of valid questions, is just to give you a little perspective on Shane, and the reason that he's taken some time with our group here is, I'm not gonna put words in Shane's mouth on, his support or non-support of the vaccinations, but he was one of the people that was injured by the vaccines. And it had taken him over a year to kind of deal with the issues and the challenges that he faced with the vaccination. So again, like I don't stick up for politicians. I don't stick up for anybody because it's not my job. But at the same time, just so you have a full understanding is like Shane's not unaware of the issues with the jabs. He's not ignorant to it. He's not, putting blinders on. When he says that he can't talk about it, he's been, wicked fair. And again, I'm not trying to call you down or anything like that. Just so you have an idea of where Shane's coming from by way of perspective. He knows.
Yeah, I realize he knows, and I'm not sorry. Maybe I'm coming across wrong, but
no.
What I'm trying to.
No, it's. I don't want it to be. Sorry, I just don't want it to be one of those challenge things where, we feel like it's a politician coming into a room and we never get a straight answer out of them. Again, yeah.
What I'm suggesting is, okay, so from my perspective, I actually think that the case that I built is an extremely strong case to push this forward. And I was actually kind of wondering if there's anyone that, maybe I can talk to in your circle, Shane, or who's working on this, to kind of lay out how I see it helping that process. Like I understand, I think the way I would go about doing it is very, very different than most people and probably very different than how it's handled in law. But I actually think it is a very strong argument that can maybe push this forward faster or maybe help it out. So I was just kind of wondering if I could do that.
Yeah, there's one person I would recommend off the hop that I know. She's a barrister out in St. Albert, I believe, and it's Angela Wood. So she might be one of those folks that you could talk to, or if you wanted, the other thing that I've done too as a legislator is I've tabled things in the House so it becomes part of public record. That's also what I've done consistently all the way through.
Okay.
And Gina, I'm sorry, because as unfamiliar as you might not be, or as unfamiliar with Shane as you are, he's not that familiar with you yet either. So if you could just give just a little brief dive into your background and your expertise in the subject matter that you talk about.
Oh, you want my background?
Yeah, just throw it out there for us. Just the quick high level.
Oh, the high level background is basically, I have a PhD in statistics and a strong background in the sciences. And throughout the pandemic, I was obviously paying attention to what was going on and the data and how it was being used. And one of the biggest strengths about being a statistician isn't just doing the analysis, it's understanding how data can be used and what you can and cannot say based on the data, what inferences can and cannot be made. And so when I look at it from that perspective, and I look at what public health was telling us and politicians were telling us, my assessment would be, can they say that based on the data? And most of the time it was no, they cannot say what they were saying. And I know this just from fundamental statistics. And then I would assess what data would they need and how would they have to collect it in order to say what they're saying. And then the third thing would be what can be said with the data we have given its shortcomings. So I'm looking at it that way. And when some of the studies came out, I can see a lot of shortcomings and there's a huge censorship issue. But when a specific study came out by Fisman, and I read it, right away I tagged it as the most blatant scientific fraud I had ever seen. And it was readily taken up. And this particular case of fraud cuts to the core of the pandemic response and cuts to the core of the mandates. And when I see this, I can't help but think, aha, I kind of, I got you. This scientific fraud shows intent. And once you have intent, it's a whole new ballgame. And that's why I'm kind of hoping it goes somewhere in terms of legislation or changing, the code. And so that I would be very happy to help in that endeavor if there's anybody I can talk to on your team.
Yeah, so you can talk to me. I've kind of been the lightning rod for this file for a couple of years now for the caucus. So what we can do is we can go offline. Sheldon can kind of exchange your information, whatever. I can talk to you in that regard. So there's a couple things that I would offer out here. So again, understanding your perspective, it helps a lot better. One of the things that I've had concerns with is loss of data, and Sheldon's kind of brought that to my attention. And a few folks that I knew and trusted outside of this political life brought me to that attention as well. And it was from that technical or engineering background that we're looking at some of our own data that was not making sense. So that's, again, what was an outlier to me as well. So in that regard, I would be more than willing to table your information in the House, then that becomes public record. If it's in the legal realm, then I would want to make sure that by no means did I prejudice your information that could be used for the good of a lot of people. And that's where that
Already published, man.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where that nuance comes into play on the legal realm, of which I'm not a lawyer, but knowing full well that there's a lot of high-priced lawyers out there potentially working for the other side of this conversation, I wouldn't want to take the chance of having something that you were wanting to do and to mess it up, quite frankly, because it could be worth too much for too many people to help them. So hopefully they understand where I'm coming from. And then on our side, I can't tell you what we're working on or what we're not working on, because it's not, it's behind closed doors. If it were, even on this call, people are going to jump up and down, record a sound bite of this, and it's going to be the Edmonton Journal tomorrow, or used in the House against me for even having this conversation. So that's the type of world that I'm in. That's the sensitivity and the landmines that I will walk, but I'm willing to walk through that with folks in this call and be as forthright as possible, knowing full well that anything I say can and will be used against me in a court of politics.
And in the public opinion. Not to cut everybody off, we had Robin that wanted to hop in with a question here. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Number one, the Law Society is telling lawyers that they have to take sensitivity training to learn how to use pronouns, or they'll lose their license to practice. And is that something that lawyers have to address themselves and make changes on the board of the Law Society, or does the government get involved? And the second question,
so part of that is the societies, and we've, so again, as the representatives of the public, right? Like we've set up these boards and these different societies for years. So typically it's their own practice of what they do. So whoever gets on those boards or otherwise, that's typically it. If there's any human rights violations or anything else that breaks law, like general law outside of the bowling club, because they all have to work with under the Societies Act themselves. If they're not breaking their own laws or their own things, then it's kind of it's up to them. And again, there's internal politics in those different boards.
Right. The other question I have is, and I don't know if this is something you can answer because of the sensitivity of it, but has the government asked AHS for an explanation of excess deaths that continue unabated in Alberta?
Yeah, on that one, I can't comment what may or may not have been asked.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I think there's enough public concern trying to say, okay, is there a backlog? Is it because we haven't been able to identify what it is, those type of things? And I believe, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I believe that would be addressed and is being addressed, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, the public deserves an answer to that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think that whether it's timing or otherwise, or backlogs or whatever reason, the COVID jello that you couldn't nail anybody to a wall while they were doing it or coming back, I don't know. But honestly, there's going to be a lot of things that need to be dealt with and put in a parking lot, and then understanding which ones that we can deal with as a lessons learned that we can implement and actually get some change. So don't forget about it. A lot of people need to deserve to understand, and yeah, it needs to be dealt with, quite honestly, Rob.
And just one final question. Have you, I know you're a real busy guy, but have you had the time to review or listen to the summary of the national COVID inquiry, citizens inquiry?
No, I haven't. It's on my list of things to do when I can get 15 or 20 minutes a day to drive in the truck. What I have been working on is on the economic corridors file and been bouncing across quite a bit on that. And then we just kicked off legislation or led the legislative assembly here. So we've been quarterbacking literally the question periods in the House every single day. So that's what I've been tied into right recently.
Yeah. Well, when you get a chance, it takes, I don't know, 15 minutes to listen to the highlights of the summary, but well worthwhile and quite informative and an eye opener, and in some instances pretty shocking.
I appreciate that. It's definitely on the list of things to take care of for sure. Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch on the same subject matter for a second, and you had brought it up earlier, Shane, about the NCI doing their thing, and just now that you hadn't really had a chance to delve into it yet, but I want to congratulate you on being the first elected official that I have heard acknowledge it even exists. And this is a part I'm going to hold you on the record for is, can you give me any reason why any other elected officials or the legacy media or anybody should not be acknowledging the existence of this report? You gave them credit for not being political. I agree, that was a major achievement for them, but we've seen nobody acknowledge its existence even any which way, shape, or form. Do you think that that's justified?
Yeah, I wouldn't propose to get inside of anyone else's head. I live rent-free in a number of them, I know that, but as far as what they might be thinking or why they may or may not win, that's up to them. But what I can say is that being in the political realm, I'm kind of an outlier. I didn't get into politics to get reelected. I got into politics to get a job done for folks that put me there in the first place. And, you know, they were, if I was dumb enough to run the second time, they were smart enough to vote for me. That was kind of the stick. So that's where we're at. There's a lot of things that politicians in this political realm, it's different. A lot of people have sensitivities towards it. There might be things that they openly look at or public facing, they might say, and it might be something different behind closed doors of where they're involved. There was a number of us, and one guy tried to hold this thing where you have a meeting and it's kind of in secret, and then he's blackmailing everybody after the fact. So there's a lot of politicians that are really sensitive towards that too. Every time you try to do something, you know, it's the old saying goes, let no good deed go unpunished. And that's happened lots to folks. And if they want to stay in the political area, they only have so many landmines they're willing to step on at a given time.
I think that the NCI's work there was forthright enough that I think that it deserves at least acknowledgement from the electoral class or elected class at least, and that's something that I see that void as indicative of other problems that people aren't willing to address or look at or even acknowledge. But kudos to you for at least acknowledging that it's not going to go away. I think the discussion based around that. So I look forward to hearing down the road if that where you found value in that moving forward with your other endeavors within the current challenges. So thanks.
Appreciate that. So did you really want to talk about pension plan here tonight? Sheldon kind of baited me with that.
Yeah, no, that's a big one. I mean, we can talk about the jab shit forever. But no, let's really hop into the pension plan thing, Shane, because it's a big hot topic for a lot of people. You know, on Twitter, on X, and people that I'm talking to in general, I mean, they want some specifics. They want an idea of what we're actually looking at. And I mean, I have some ideas in how the pension's being used, and I believe it's being used fraudulently to prop up an industry that has zero merit inside of Canada. To be honest with you. And, you know, I'm happy that the UCP is going towards the carbon capture, but I don't see any value to it. I really don't believe that we have an impact over the ability of the sun, especially when the rest of the planet is not abiding by the lunacy that we're viewing.
What do you mean if I burn diesel fuel down on the East Coast, it's okay? And it doesn't, those molecules don't hit the atmosphere out west here. Like, what do you mean, Sheldon? What are you talking about?
Well, there's a big portion of that, but I'm thinking, places that are not even on the same chunk of rock inside of the same waters that we are. If we're the ones that are leading the charge on this, we're the ones that are setting the example. Haven't we already?
Sheldon, if that were true, you never would have had, if that were true, then why in the heck did we not get waste from Chernobyl blown over top of us for a number of years? Like, come on, it's obviously independent. There's a big wall there. We never would have seen that happen.
Well, it's a true story. But on the pension side of things, like I said, when we're looking at CPP and where the CPP is actually invested, there's a lot of green technology that it's kind of gone into. And we keep hearing about this phenomenal investment that's coming into all provinces, and specifically Alberta. They say, Alberta's got the most green investments into it, and the terrible people inside of the UCP have put the blocks up on it, and now they just want their money back, and it's going to harm the country. But they don't actually get any money back from this. So, I mean, it's all talking circles. And for commoners like myself, I mean, we can wrap our head in tinfoil and come up with a couple of good ideas as to what's actually going on here. But from the inside circles and what you're allowed to speak of, please do talk about what's on the go right now with what we're looking at. I'm pretty sure it's kind of in a hiatus mode until we get an idea of what the government of Canada is going to actually give to the province before we even go to plebiscite, right?
Well, and here's the cool thing with it. So it's an actual contract. Like where we've got equalization and transfer payments, there's a lot of hair in that dog. There's no question. But when it comes to the pension plan, it's pretty straightforward. So back in the day, you had everybody signing on with the exception of a couple that decided to go their own way. And basically Ontario, as the lore goes, Ontario had concerns that they'd be putting the bill for everybody and they'd all be just hanging off Ontario for years. So if Ontario were untoward or had an issue, they wanted an exit clause. So now you roll the shot clock forward. Here it is, Alberta, that might be pulling that exit clause. So I don't find that, kind of makes me laugh a little bit. That's kind of neat how that worked out. So back in the 60s, they pulled this thing up. Everyone says, yeah, that's a heck of an idea. Let's pour some cash into this and let's get going. And then when it had been opened up, one of the things that they said, well, the calculations are all wrong. I can't be. Well, the CPP itself had been opened up 2 or 3 times. So every time they open this thing up to either do a minor tweak to the contract or to look under the hood, there was no one ever that had a pause for concern in the calculations or formulas. So there was none of that. So 2020, we going through and do this fair deal panel thing because we're getting lots of ideas of what Albertans want, where's the fairness in the Confederation, what are things that we should look at. And lo and behold, folks says, hey, why don't you go take a look at that pension plan and see what's going on. Now, back in the day when I was a kid, I was more concerned that there wouldn't be a pension plan because from what I had
told us.
Yeah, I mean, get your own RRSPs, get these other things because you can't count on it, whether it was the size, the value, or simply the management at the time. So they've turned it around. They're managing. They're running a good portfolio from what we can tell from the outside. That's cool. We're told again by the public, go look at this thing. So we do. We go and look at the numbers that are available. We got a first sniff of it and went, well, holy crow, that seems to be pretty sizable. Let's really don't do the back of the napkin. Albertans need to know what this thing really looks like. Let's hire a actuary to go through it, take the information that we have, and go tell us what this thing is worth. So now folks have to understand, and I kind of did a little demonstration. Oh, by the way, apparently none of us UCP guys will do town halls. Apparently none of us will talk openly about it. But I'll tell you what, last Thursday, out at Onaway, I did my town hall. I advertised it on social media, advertised these things in the local papers. 125 people showed up for 2 hours of boring conversation. I only say boring because it was very well respected. Everyone really kept their sticks on the ice. We asked some really good questions, and it was overwhelmingly people were supportive of what we were doing. They might need more information to make their mind up. There was only 2 that were in a room of 125 that spoke against it. Like it was phenomenal. So sitting in the House, you listen to what the opposition is saying. 90% of Albertans don't want to do it. All these town hall engagements are a sham, blah, blah, blah. Absolutely wrong. So the dome disease thing that Ralph Klein came up with years ago, it actually does apply when you talk to folks. So we get these numbers, they come back to us, and they kind of jump off the page. Like you're looking at, $334 billion. You've got, 17% of the population that's done this. And, I've said to folks lots that it's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. They've been making the rules up with our gold for years. So then you see as soon as we release this report, well, Team Angry gets all fired up and they've been using this for whatever they've been doing with it for years. And you've got Trudeau saying that, well, you can't leave. Well, partner, it's not the Eagles song. This ain't the Hotel California. We can check up. We can definitely leave. Like if we do a cat call on this thing, all we have is
but it's the former Minister of Finance's accounting company, Morneau Chappelle, that did the math.
yeah, it's not by accident. We picked some companies for sure. So there's a little bit of credibility that goes with it. So that had to get sorted out in the public, and you can see all the churn over it. So that's, Team Angry doing the air war on social media and otherwise. And then the next pivotal point for us was literally the other finance ministers paying attention to this. They started looking at it themselves going, holy crow, yeah, this actually makes sense. The provinces themselves within the contract, they don't have any say in the matter. They can't weigh in on how much we get, and they can't weigh on whether it's our decision or not. So each province is independent in this. Again, Ontario, thank you so much. You did a great contract clause because we can all use it if we want to. So that's sitting there. The other item that we brought to people's attention is we kind of did some numbers on it through that report, looking at the impacts it may have on each independent province. So it's not like you're going to cavitate this whole thing. You're looking at a spread between 0.5 to 1.5 or 2% uptake for what other folks might have to pay more on it. The other thing that came out is, oh my gosh, you do this, it's going to be unstable. Well, why would it be unstable? The three options that we have on this thing through the contract again, I can use the exact same firm that's managing it now, simply cash out, put the cash in a different filing cabinet, move it to a different office. And when they lick that stamp and they send the correspondence back and forth, instead of going through the feds, who's looking at this, nationally, it just comes directly to our office. And when we do that, there's about $5 billion in savings. The second option that we have is that you can use an existing company if we have one that would meet the needs of it. The third one would be to spool up a brand new company and do it. And what we had also said in that is that we would take a portion of that fund to set those organizations up, whatever Albertans wanted to do. Obviously, the lowest cost value, lowest risk would be to stay with the same company, go to a different company or otherwise. So that's kind of sitting there. So walking folks through this, it makes total sense. When you hear what's happening in the media, they're saying it's Russian roulette. They're saying a bunch of things that just doesn't make sense. So now that we've ran
the law to stop Alberta from leaving them.
Well, there's an old saying, you can't outsmart stupid, and I've been trying to outsmart these guys for years and it hasn't worked. I can't figure what they would do next, but they would have to really hoof on it pretty quick to pull that in place, especially since we've already had the conversation. Now, the other part of it is once those other finance ministers got together and started talking, and then Freeland said, oh yeah, we need to talk about this pension plan. Well, Minister Horner's response was, yeah, let's do that. Come on out to Calgary. And while we're at it, why don't we talk about the carbon tax? Why don't we talk about equalization and transfer payments? Why don't we have a good conversation? So that's how the negotiations started going back and forth. So now there's some options here of our snapshot, our numbers of what we have with what is publicly available and our contract. There's the numbers that the LifeWorks came up with. That's what we're sitting on. That's what's public facing. Now, Freeland and company have to go away and do their own actuary. So they're going to take a look at what they have for numbers, open kimono at this point, and then come back to the table with something that should be reasonable. That's where we come up with a number that is then, there's some little bit of wiggle room for negotiation between those two numbers. And then that's potentially the number that we would be taking forward to Alberta. So now we know exactly where both parties lay, snapshots in time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, people are trying to look at this linearly, which the other side is using really well as a disinformation war, quite honestly. How can it be? How could it possibly be that 17% of the people involved in this pension plan have over 53% of the value? Well, we've got an outlier in our country because Albertans are way younger for our population than the rest. We actually have the right thing. There's more younger people than there are older people. So less people are taking out of returns in the bottom of this thing. More people are pouring in. And when you look at the real potential and the growth, it happened during one of our biggest upturns in the economy. So we literally had a number of really good years. Folks are racking up a bunch of cash. We're putting it in. We're paying more into the CPP because we're earning more on our paychecks. At the time, more of the population is all earning that. It wasn't by chance that a lot of people from Canada were coming to Alberta to weigh in on that and stayed here. So that's where the numbers are coming in. So that's kind of the long and short of it in that regard. So now we got to wait for Freeland and company to come back with their numbers, get that number up to Albertans. And right now we just finished doing the first round of engagements because we need to get a sense where Albertans were at, what they want to know for more information. So round one is done. Round two will be coming up. We'll make sure that we keep giving people more feedback and more information based on it. We've had over 76,000 people on these 5 phone calls, about 15,000 people a night were dialing into these things. And now you've got, MLAs like me running around that are actually conversing with folks, having these town halls, while the other side is going up there, going through the Rolodex of whoever they have as supporters, trying to drum up cash at these meetings and quite frankly, throwing this vitriol out on the table. And then they're putting the gauntlet down that, we should walk into a room and have a debate with them. Well, I'm not debating with them about this. There's lots of room for debate in the House. My job as an actual MLA is to make sure that good, honest information gets to people so they can be informed. And when we get to the point, if Albertans want us to do this, we'll definitely follow the referendum rules. And even so much that we put a bill in the House, Bill 2, which said that if we were to go for an Alberta Pension Plan, that we're going to lock in your contributions will be equal to or less, and your payback will be equal to or more than what you're getting from the CPP. And if Albertans want to do this, it will follow a referendum under the Referendum Act. So literally existing legislation, get us to that point, give you the numbers, we get a good sense that folks want to do this, we'll fire up a referendum. But just to say we're going to have a referendum just waste a bunch of time and money for everybody when we don't have that number locked in through those negotiations. That's not what Albertans expect from our party, or I wouldn't expect that from someone reasonable. So that's kind of where we're at. Town halls will be going on. Look forward to lots of comments and feedback, and I'll just keep being the farm kid, explaining what I can from these reports and giving people as much information as possible so they don't have to take my word for it. They can go back to the report and test it themselves.
You're here.
Sheldon, you're muted.
You'd think I'd be better at this by now. It's just never going to be the case. Thanks, Rob. Shane, I think you had kind of a hard stop at 8 o'clock, or do you have a little bit more time to give? I mean, I want to be appreciative and respectful of your time.
Oh, I'm good. I'm already in the doghouse at home anyway, so might as well be a few more chain links deep.
Okay. No, and that's perfect. So I think we've covered a good portion of what we managed to go through here. Andy Lee's no longer in the House. We had the APP. Now, one question about if we were to look at legislation on AHS specific, and what if we wanted to put forward something where medications couldn't be approved inside of the province unless there was a liability clause by the manufacturers or by the drug companies? It's not something that could potentially flex. I mean,
I'd have to look at this because again, we don't approve. From my understanding, again, you've got federal approvals on a lot of this stuff for medications, and then the provinces can do it, even though we're responsible for the health care. There's a lot of things that get overlaps, right? Like the same as the Food and Drug Administration, the same type of thing. So you've got federal jurisdiction in a bunch of these items.
Yeah.
And then we fall in some really weird place underneath that. So I don't believe that we can actually do that. I believe that they're approved. Excuse me. Really.
Okay. No, because I was just like, I know we're, I don't want to use the word progressive because anytime progressive has been used in politics, it turns out to be the exact inverse of progress. It's been the worst shit to come to play. But I mean, like Danielle Smith's been pretty progressive with the UCP support in kind of going forward with things. And so I just wondered if, if there's any more ways that, and I'm not going to say through Sovereignty Act, that we could do this, but maybe that's something we want to touch on is the latest conversation about the heating tax and the carbon tax.
Oh yeah, that's bonkers. So I did make that trip over to Germany, and it was really neat of seeing where all this is going. And I managed to sit for half an hour with the leader of the Green Party in Germany at a supper there by accident. And it's a coalition government over there. It's made of the 3 different governing parties. They call them the traffic light group. You've got one that's a red party, a yellow party, and then the Green Party. And after half an hour of sitting with this lady, I got a full appreciation of where all these things are coming from and driven. And it's not Trudeau dreaming it up, and it sure isn't the guy that climbs CN Towers. Yeah, there was no way. So basically, what they're considering to be green is anything that comes from solar or wind. And if it's hydrogen, then it has to be cracked off of fresh water for the most part, or electrolysis from salt water. But the energy used to do it has to be green. It has to be their definition of electricity from solar or wind. So really,
they're trying to create perpetual energy.
Yeah,
energy that creates more energy, that's always green.
But it's a law of diminishing returns on this. Every time you do one of those energy transition states, both from industry's perspective or otherwise, you keep taking more energy to make it. And this is how whack it gets. Literally sitting in this think tank group, one of the guys is really happy and excited about this jet fuel they're going to make, this green jet fuel. And I'm thinking this is pretty cool, because I was just over at the U of A going through one of their associate deans, his lab, of how he's working on jet fuel with Forge Industries and a few other groups. And this guy has an oil and gas background. He has the ag background, everything else. His lab is just phenomenal, really cool stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they're coming up with something similar where they're using enzymes or biodigesters or however they're going to do this. Let's see how this works. So this guy, and I'm tired now, so I'm going to be way less political. The group that's coming up with this are a bunch of millennials. So this kid that's wearing, I shouldn't say kid, but this gentleman who has hair like Sideshow Bob, and he's wearing a backpack off of his back, is going to come in and tell us how he's going to do this. And he's going to create jet fuel. And I'm thinking, this is great. And he says, what we're going to do is we're going to take hydrogen. So hydrogen, again, that's produced through electrolysis from wind and solar, because it's green hydrogen. And we're going to take carbon. And we're going to take carbon and we're going to combine hydrogen with it. We're going to make a hydrocarbon. I'm going, wow. And that's going to be green. I said, or I cannot waste all the time and effort of doing that, of taking fresh water, because I need to feed people and do that. And I can take hydrocarbon from the ground and I can just put it through a nice bubble tower and crack you off jet fuel. So this is the issue when these things take place in a vacuum, right? So after sitting with the Green Party leader for this half an hour of her telling me all the things that we're doing wrong, and I'm mentioning our hydrogen map, I'm talking about our environmental plans, I'm talking about reducing emissions, talking about how we reduce methane emissions 45%, 3 years ahead of schedule, how whether I liked it or not, we phased off coal, and real coal, not the stuff they burn over there. How 80% of the renewable investments are here in the province. I start going through it, and that's still not good enough for her. And she's saying, you're still doing it all wrong. You have to do what we're doing. I said, quite frankly, I said, with all respect, it took me about 7.5, 8 hours to get here to Germany from home, 4.5 hours of which that took me just to get out of my own country by air. And I took the short route. It was another hour over top of Greenland. So we're already pushing 5.5 hours. Maybe an hour over the Atlantic. And I said, and the rest, once I hit your shoreline, it was 45 minutes to get here. Our province is twice the size of your country. You have 85 million people. I have 4.5 million people. I'm sitting on the 4th largest known proven oil reserve on the planet. I'm sitting on 223 trillion cubic feet of gas. I have most of the coal in my country, not the stuff that you mine, about 80% of these assets, both high-grade thermal coal and metallurgical coal. The US imports 60% of their energy, comes from my country. Well north of 50% of that comes from my province. 99% of their gas imports comes from my province. The biggest thing that I have for a climate issue of pollution are forest fires, of which we burnt off this summer alone the size of Switzerland, and still I have 62% of my province is forested. So in all essence and in all fairness, If Germany was sitting on these many resources and energy, do you think we'd be having a conversation about solar panels and wind farms right now? So it was literally a mic drop moment. I went over and shook the other gentleman's hand who was part of the coalition. And I basically said to him, I said, I didn't realize how tenuous your coalition was. I said, I just had the privilege of sitting with her for half an hour. And the German culture folks are pretty prim and proper. And he actually leans in and goes, she's freaking crazy. So we kind of broke down these social barriers by hanging out with this guy for a while. And that's the challenge that Germany is in right now. A lot of this has become an ideology. When we're sitting with a jurisdiction and I'm pushing them on it, asking them what their percentage of risk tolerance is for failure, and they're telling me they've got 30% risk model in this of meeting their objectives. And I tongue in cheek said again, so you mean to tell me if I jump on the train, I'm going to be traveling at 200 kilometers an hour from Essen here, whipping back to Berlin, and I've got a 30% chance of this thing derailing before I get there. Do you think that's a good train trip? You want to come with me? We can't do that. And I even had the senators from the states and representatives, a bunch of good Democrat folks. By the end of this trip, they were asking all the same questions. This is not going to work. Why are we doing this? And really, it all comes back to money. And I think that you can see with the recent debacle with the carbon tax of saying that diesel fuel burnt on the East Coast, it's okay because it doesn't pollute the environment. But if you burn natural gas out west, it's terrible. It's never been about the environment. It's always been about economics and energy supply. Energy security is going to be king here. You're going to need that so you can feed your people and your population, and also the critical elements that you have to defend your nation and make sure that keeps in place. If you have an imbalance in that regard, the easiest thing to do is to take your laser pointer, point it in the corner, get all the cats chasing something else like the climate, while you're actually really trying to get everybody to be just as energy impoverished as you are and to be on a level playing field. If you have people at that state and that level, they're going to take away their economic advantages and their energy advantages, and then they're going to have to come to your level, of which the UN, all them, have to pay exorbitant amounts to keep the lights on, because then you're all going to trade and make stuff that's at the same energy levels and outputs and costs for energy. This is literally what it's about. It's never been about the environment. Everybody knows it, but that's the deal. So when you're getting snowballed into having Guy vote, tell us that even though it's been proven in a court of law, and even though that we don't have the same attributes of the things they have down east, that we have to hammer ourselves in a corner and make life so unaffordable that we're going to go bankrupt because he's going to put a law in effect. No, we're not buying that. That's not in the rights of what we should be doing as elected people for Alberta. So we literally this week took and we've been trying to work with these guys for the last 6 months on this. We literally took the Sovereignty Act off the shelf, dusted it off for the first time, swung it in the House, and put it on the table. We are not going to follow their clean energy standards, because if we do that, you're literally making criminals out of anybody who produces anything for energy, for electricity or otherwise, that they don't deem to be clean or green. It's a fairy tale thing that they're coming up with. It's not addressing the technical issues or problems. If we give our engineering folks a problem to solve and give them enough time, they'll do it. So it's never been about the technological items. We can make our energy way more efficient, less pollutants, everything else. That's it. But we are not going to let Spider Monkey and Fancy Socks run us into the ground. Not happening.
Shane, I love that. I got to throw my 2 bits in here for the folks that are listening on my channel here. And you know, I come from bare, old school redneck stock. Nothing special about where I come from. And I'm going to borrow a line from Festus. The creek don't clear up till you get the pigs out. But what I heard from your story there is you flew halfway around the world listening to a group of people debating the semantics of the characteristics of unicorns and expecting the world to custom tailor make saddles for them. And you basically told them, sorry guys, there ain't no such thing as unicorns, regardless if you like the pink one or the purple one. And that's kind of what I think most people in Canada actually believe about climate change. We know we're in a giant carbon sink. We know that this is all a charade, and they are continuously debating the characteristics of unicorns, calling them carbon taxes, and the people are suffering for it. So I'm glad to see you guys swinging with whatever you've got, because insanity is unsustainable, and somebody's got to tell these people that the emperor has no clothes.
Well, and then, so as my folks down in the south would say, that I'd work with, that dog don't hunt. It literally, that's where it came back to. So the climate changes. We are seeing a period right now that we haven't seen since 10,000 years up north with the glaciation and the ice packs, and because the Northwest Passage is coming open. This happens. But talking about the climate crisis, this is where they ratcheted up the next event. Everything is a flipping crisis with them. Well, it's not a crisis and a panic over here. We're sitting in all this energy. We do the things way better. We've got a secure trading market and everything else. So for North America in the context, then we come up with what our clean energy is, and we can do it better, and we always have. And nothing like having some guardrails and some motivators to make it happen a little quicker. Great. But we sure as the heck are not going to go shoot ourselves in the foot before we got to get on the dance floor. It doesn't make sense. So all of those things kind of resonated, and I was a little concerned of my lack of, international diplomacy at that point. I kept my stick on the ice, but I was very forthright. That actually resonated with folks over there. So Germany themselves had a trip planned to go over to the US. They 2 weeks after us getting wheels down back here, reached out through the consulate and asked to meet with us as Alberta to talk about our energy file, to talk about our ag file, to talk about our environmental file, to talk about all these things that didn't make sense when they went and spoke to our illustrious leader down east, because now they wanted the direct conversations. And I can't share a ton with you on this because obviously we're working on it. Let's just put it this way. They were very impressed with the Alberta beef. They were very impressed with what we had to offer. They were very impressed with the candor. And Texas North is alive and well, and we're looking to do business with whomever needs our energy, and we'll come up with the color coding index, whatever it needs, but they're going to keep the lights on over there too. When they had to go over and cut a deal with Qatar and, sign up those contracts, it wasn't because Qatar was the greenest place on the planet to get it from. It wasn't because of their environmental standards nor their human rights records. It's because they had the gas when they needed it. And it wasn't, because they didn't think that they needed environmental items to be put in place when Germany went through up the receiving stations within 130 days. They fast-tracked everything because there was a dire need for energy. That's it. So as soon as you cut through the quick of all the other stuff, people can sit across from the table from each other, sort out some problems on a handshake, and away we go. And that's what's going to be carrying us forward. So that one I'm pretty fired up about, because again, as a private member, I'm just a guy from Alberta, just, normal farm kid that got into this industry that manages to go across the pond, have those conversations. And next thing you know, you're sitting across the table from dignitaries that are coming over here to get the straight goods from us. That felt pretty damn good.
Is Japan next?
Hey, yeah, well, it's interesting. Minister Jean was over in Japan. They were doing that. India's another one too. I'd met with the consulate general from there. They definitely want everything we can get them. And once I started speaking about the corridor model, I gave him my task force report. He took that away. It went from maybe we should talk to all of a sudden he's got folks showing up to the World Oil Show that took place down in Calgary, meeting with Premier, and then having continuing conversations. And then Trudeau's escapades over there, that was my concern, was all of a sudden we do all this goodwill, the same thing, we're well received, that he goes over there and chuckles up another deal. And then India's like fourth largest economy in the world. By 2045, they might be the largest economy in the world. They are the largest democracy on the planet. They have the largest population. And we've got a ton of folks from Indian descent over here that they're friends and family at this point. Like, we're all integrated and intertwined. So why in the heck would we chuckle up a deal like that? Oh yeah, and they're a space race nation. They landed something on the moon. Like, why would we go and mess this one up? So I was really encouraged when we got all the consulates together. This is going back about a month ago now, and down in Calgary, and literally it was the first time since 2018 that we sat across from what felt like the United Nations, of all these different consulates from around the world, asking us directly questions, having that conversation, and everyone's going away shaking hands and exchanging cards and figuring out how we can help each other out. And India did extend, saying, you guys need to come over to India. We know that your prime minister isn't Alberta. We like you guys.
Well,
work together.
You're talking to all the people that Trudeau doesn't want you talking to, so kudos for that. So keeping that in mind when you get a chance to have a chat with Tucker Carlson coming up here, send my regards, and I'd like to have a chat with him.
Well, that was funny to hear in the house. They were going on, don't talk to Tucker. Don't talk to Tucker. I mean, oh my gosh. the fact that the premier is coming here to Calgary, has the premier on, it was sold out within, you know, how long he talks to, I don't know, is it 35 million people in one of his sit downs?
About 60 million people view his show average.
Right. So 60 million people. How many people do we have in Canada? Like, can you imagine having everybody in Canada plus their friends and relatives in any of the bordering states tuned in at one time to hear about what's happening in Alberta for an hour? Why would we not do that, regardless of whatever they believe in his politics? And again, he's the interviewer. Premier is the one being interviewed that gets a chance to talk about all the good things we have going on. So why would the left not want us talking to Tucker? I mean, it's just wild.
Well, I think you had a question. I'm not sure if you you had your hand up earlier. Did you still have a question?
I do have a question.
Not Robin.
I'll just preface it by saying that, you know, anthropogenic climate change is a socialist lie, and it's a canard to obtain political power and to facilitate a transition to a command style economy. My question is although I'm sure Daniel Smith isn't big on creating a crown electrical generation company, being a free enterpriser, is there any way that the government can stick handle this until we get Trudeau and Singh out of office? Because I'm sure
there's a couple of things on that. So again, the climate change, we got to talk about climate change. I mean, that's vernacular, it's out there. Does the climate change? Yes. But really what we should be talking about is what can we do for adaptability and resilience? And what can we do to clean up our own backyard? We're doing it. That's the problem. We haven't had the microphone to talk to Tucker, to have 60 million people hear about all the good stuff we're doing. So we've been taking the show on the road, and that's what we've been doing. Premier's been doing a phenomenal job. Her and Minister Schultz got a pass from the chief whip that they could leave next week and go over to COP28. And I find it kind of ironic. I'm the guy now that says permission of who can go, and it's my boss is the premier, and I'm going, yeah, you can go next week. Like, it's wild. But that's how tight we are on votes in the House, and we want to make sure that we don't lose government by, you know, sleight of hand of someone not being there because the opposition breaks a deal in behind or whatever might happen. So we're really paying attention to that. So with Premier being over there, we are going to talk on a world stage about all the good things we do. Saskatchewan has a pavilion there. They were going to go under the Canadian pavilion, but they would only let Saskatchewan talk for about 45 minutes on one of the 5 items that they wanted to talk about. So Premier Moe and his crew said, yeah, well, whatever, we're going to go over and represent ourselves. So Quebec gave us that advice for me as well. Go on the road, tell your story, because Canada's not going to do it for you. So that's what you're seeing on the provincial level. When it comes to the energy file, yeah, it's not our first inclination to fire up a Crown Corporation, but because of the items that Guilbeault and Trudeau and whoever else down there are dreaming up or taking their orders from whomever, we're in a position where we have to put a shield up at this point. So right now, because
I understand why she might want to do it if she's forced, because
I think we're still going to have to anyway. Like, if I look at the build out of this, once you start getting to small mods or micro mods or anything else, we're going to have to stabilize the market in that regard on the generation side. That we're probably going to have to act as that incubator, no different than we did on the oil sands, no different than we did on SAGD facilities, those type of things. So we've got to stand it up again, and it acts kind of as a shelter. And if we had to do some other contractual work, we could provide
Alberta energy
generators. Yeah, like AEC when we flashed up back in the day. So this isn't unbeknownst to us, but we might have to put these things in place. The frustrating part for all of us is that when you've got intonations that the federal government might put your private industry in jail for producing electricity, that's a big problem. That's a destabilizing effect.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bonnie. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay. I appreciate all the work that Mr. Getson has done, but I don't give a crap about that. I want to know why I want to know why the injuries of people like me and people like you are not at the forefront of everything you do. I don't give a crap about all of the economic stuff. What about people?
Well, it can be both, Bonnie. It's just this tonight was on the topic of something other than COVID, but if you want to have another session that specifically talks about my injuries and what we're doing in that file for me personally, then we can do that.
Okay, so thank you for not answering my question.
Well, no, Bonnie, in all fairness, I mean, we have a fairly diverse panel, and I use that as an actual positive. For the size of the group that we had, a lot of different ideas and aspects that kind of came into play. And, I've kind of formed a group around me, the vaccinations and the troubles that it's caused inside of the province, inside of Canada. And, with a great appreciation. But there's a lot of other problems. And I mean, Bonnie, there's a lot of us definitely appreciate what's going on with those that have been injured or those that, and it's not just a direct injury. It's just those that are suffering financially, those that have lost their homes, those that have lost their families, their businesses. It's, what's happened over the last few years hasn't escaped us. But there are other conversations. There are other conversations that we have to have moving forward. And, when Shane was invited in, he was invited in under the premise that we're going to have a conversation over a number of different topics. So it's not specific to you. It's not against you. It's just a conversation that happened at the most opportune time that we could get it together. Shane, I think we started talking in September, didn't we?
Yeah, something like that. But Sheldon, if you want to have one that's pulled up specifically to talk about what I have or haven't done on a specific topic. No, you may not. I'm going to continue my conversation here. So Sheldon, back to you. If you want to have one that's specific for that, then let's get that arranged and you can have all these questions and comments and I can come prepared for that as well. And we can get people updated on what we're physically doing. But the comment back to Gina is still salient. There's things I can talk about, and there's things I can't. Because if I talk about some things out there, it might have a negative consequence for people like Bonnie if we're too early on some of these conversations.
That's fair enough. And I think as we progress, I think, somewhere into the new year, it'd be a great opportunity to see where we kind of advance to. But come down to it, I mean, we've just gotten the report out from Manning. That's taken a year to get into place. We have an idea of some of the lawsuits that are going on now. We're going to see how some of that has to play out. There's going to have to be some precedents in place, but it's a slow process. I mean, I work for a manufacturer. I work for a number of large companies, and I know, something the size of a government. I mean, something the size of a company doesn't change overnight.
The other thing I kind of put to folks too is that if you're going to put me in battle, at least let me have a full magazine before I go in there. So if I'm only going to go in and take some things.
This is not news to you.
I want to have
not news to
all
you.
the tools at my disposal to get the best consequence and the outcomes.
Yeah, you're talking me out. This is not news to you. This is not news to you. You knew that the people of Alberta were going to challenge you.
Okay.
I am.
Are you listening to anything I'm saying, Bonnie, or do you just want to yell?
No, are you listening?
If I need to do that, you can yell at me all you want. Ever go for it. I'll sit here and I'll be your piñata for the next half hour. Go for it.
No, we're not going to allow that. No, Shane, when you're invited to one of our conversations, it's not so that we can invite people in to beat up on you, and that's never been the case. And I expect a certain amount of decorum and respect for your time. If there are questions, I'll definitely forward your contact information to whoever wants to have those conversations, but I'm not going to let this be a mudslinging pit. I appreciate what Bonnie's going through. She's been a part of the group for a while. I've chatted with her in various ways, but at the same time, I still expect a certain amount of respect inside of the community and inside of the town halls that we have. So,
and I appreciate that, Sheldon. And again, it's not because I don't care, because I know folks out there suffering with a ton of issues. But again, if folks can understand, there's things that I can do, things that I can say, and I can't, regardless of the emotions. I'm being absolutely 100% honest with you. And if we do have to take on a fight, I want to make sure I have all the things at my disposal when we do that, and it has to be at the right time.
Absolutely. No.
Yeah, I think we all understand that there is a witch's brew of social and political and civil and criminal issues surrounding COVID injuries and deaths. And I fully appreciate why there's a lot of things that you can't speak to or address right now, Shane. And I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt and reading between the lines that there are things happening in the background, and we'll just have to be patient and let them unfold. That's all I have to say about that.
I think that
Shane.
I am beaten. I was just going to squeeze you, Sheldon, and say thank you, Shane, and everybody else that turned in to do all this. If we don't use it all up in one night, maybe we could do it again instead.
No, that's it. I again always like to appreciate the time that Shane allows us. And again, the most important person that showed up in the room tonight was everybody that showed up in the room tonight. It shows that you're concerned about, where we are moving forward as a province, where we are moving forward together as a community, and support for what we have as an actual community. So, I definitely appreciate everybody that's taken the time. Shane, greatly appreciated for you again coming out to see with us. And if there's anything that you want to speak to, anything that you want to come out to the group for, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'd love to hold another one of these with you. And then as time affords and as we progress in some of these things, the invite's always going to be open, and I'll reach out to you again.
No, I appreciate it. And again, it's the forum. The big broader picture is no one person I think is on the phone here or on this call as an expert, but holy crow, do we have a lot of information once you pull everybody together. Like, that is the really cool part. No one knows everything about every area, but I learn something new every time that I come on here. And quite frankly, it fires me up. It makes me feel like I'm on the right track. And when I need a pat in the back, that's nice to have. When I need a kick in the pants too, that's deserved. So that goes both ways here. And just really appreciate the forum. And if there is stuff for folks in the call, run it through Sheldon or through my office, or otherwise we'll spool another one of these up anytime and go from there.
Yeah, and I'd like to extend the invite. Everybody has my email address through the Substack. That's just how you got here tonight. So all you have to do is reply to me if there's anything specific that you want me forward to Shane, and I'm happy to do so. And his office has been great. From not knowing me from anybody, I managed to get him on a call in a matter of a month and a half for the first time that we had a conversation for one of these things. We had a private chat in before, and I think that was so he could please see how crazy I actually was. But then he was very agreeable to come on and have a conversation with all of us. So feel free to run anything up to me, or reach out to your own independent MLA. But I mean, like, the important thing is that we do act as a community, and that we do take some of the advice that Shane's able to pass to us. If there are places that we think that need changes, it's up to us to sometimes have to stand up and be a part of the change that we want to see. So, hey guys, I greatly appreciate everybody for coming out tonight. Wayne, nice to see you. Robin, Gina, we'll be talking here over the next short period of time. Shane, everybody that was here, fantastic having you guys all out. And I want to wish you guys, if we don't do this again before, have a Merry Christmas. All the best to us all into the new year. And I appreciate the support. You all have a good night.
Happy holidays, and thank you again, Shane, and thank you, Sheldon.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, take care, folks. Merry Christmas.
Bye.
And that was that. Wow. That was long. Thank you guys, for those of you that hung out for the duration. I genuinely had absolutely no idea what that was going to be like, or how long it was going to run. But I enjoyed that, and I hope you guys did too. There was some good information coming out. It was good to hear from the two I see in Alberta. I'm cautiously optimistic about what I see happening in Alberta. And you know, as Shane mentioned, I've met him a couple of times, and I hadn't spoken with him for quite a while, but it was quite obvious to me he remembered our last conversation and he had actually taken it on board. So that kind of makes me a little bit more interested in talking to him again. Perhaps we'll get him in on a one-on-one. So yeah, there was a lot to digest and go through there. This was not the show that I had originally intended or scheduled or planned for tonight, but thank you guys for tuning in. Anyway, I will do that tomorrow. I want to talk about some stories that nobody else is covering, and I'll be covering one of them on the Wendy Bell show tomorrow morning. I think at 10:30 Eastern time, about a veteran in Manitoba that is just having the most unimaginable series of events and persecution at the hands of the local RM, the local municipality. So I want to dive into that tomorrow night. So 6 o'clock Central tomorrow, back to our regular time. I'll dig into that and some shows coming up for next week. So some good stuff coming up, guys. Thank you guys all. Today was the last day for our $1 membership at Patriot Switch. I'm sure there's going to be something exciting coming down the pipe for tomorrow, 1st of December, and I'll keep you guys informed of that tomorrow as well. But I got to tell you guys, that has been one of the most interesting things that I'm being able to be a part of. And I'll talk about some of those other kinds of things too, but we're doing a whole lot of stuff thinking down the road for the future, and we'll dive into some of that tomorrow as well. So thank you guys all for staying so late and so long. I love you all. Stay Canadian, stay strong, and believe it or not, guys, I think we're starting to win. And I'll explain a whole bunch of that tomorrow again as well. So love y'all. Stay Canadian, and we'll see you tomorrow.